Imagine moving into your dream seaside home, only to be haunted by visions of a woman strangled at the foot of your staircase. A memory from a childhood you didn't know you had. In Sleeping Murder, Gwenda Reed uncovers a chilling truth. 18 years ago, in her house, Helen Halliday was murdered by her obsessive brother, Dr. Kennedy, who buried her secret in a cliffside grave. With Miss Marple's cunning, Gwenda's buried memories unravel a web of lies, leading to a trap that exposes the killer. A gripping tale of hidden pasts and deadly control. Will the truth set Gwenda free or pull her into danger? Chapter 1. The House on the Hill. The late summer sun cast long shadows across the lawn of Hillside, a Georgian house perched on a gentle rise overlooking the sleepy seaside town of Dilmouth. Its whitewashed walls glowed softly, and the ivy that clung to its corners seemed to whisper of years gone by. Gwenda Reed, 21 and brimming with the optimism of youth, stepped through the front door, her footsteps echoing on the polished oak floor. She carried a small crate of belongings, her contribution to the home she and her husband Giles had purchased on a whim during a fleeting visit to England. The house had charmed them instantly. Its sash windows, its airy rooms, its promise of a new beginning, far from the humid bustle of New Zealand. Gwenda set the crate down in the drawing-room, where the scent of fresh paint mingled with the faint mustiness of old wood. She paused to survey the space. High ceilings, a marble fireplace, and a bay window framing the distant sparkle of the sea. It was perfect, or so she had thought when they signed the papers. Yet now, as she stood alone, a peculiar unease settled over her, like a cloud drifting across the sun. She brushed it aside, attributing it to the fatigue of their journey, and began unpacking a set of porcelain figurines, arranging them on the mantel with care. As she reached for a shepherdess figurine, her gaze drifted to the hall beyond the open door. The staircase, broad and curving, rose to the upper floor, its banister gleaming under a fresh coat of varnish. Without warning, a vision flashed before her eyes, sharp and vivid as a photograph. A woman lay sprawled at the foot of the stairs, her face contorted, her throat bruised by cruel hands. Blonde hair fanned across the floor, and a man's voice, low and mocking, murmured words Gwenda could not catch. Her heart lurched, and the figurine slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hearth. "Gwenda!" Giles's voice broke the spell. He appeared in the doorway, his sandy hair dishevelled, a packing box under one arm. At 25, he had the easy confidence of a man who believed life's problems could be solved with a smile and a bit of effort. "What's happened? You're white as a sheet." She forced a laugh, bending to gather the porcelain fragments. "Just clumsy, that's all. I dropped the shepherdess. Silly of me." Giles set his box down and crossed to her, his blue eyes searching her face. "It's more than that, darling. You've been jumpy all day. Is it the house? Too big? Too old?" "No, it's lovely," Gwenda said quickly. "Too quickly." She straightened, dusting her hands on her skirt. "I'm just tired. The crossing, the move, it's a lot." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded, though his frown lingered. "All right, let's get the rest of these boxes in, then we'll have tea. I found a kettle in the kitchen, and Mrs. Cocker, the Daily, left some scones." Gwenda smiled, grateful for his practicality, and followed him outside to the car. The sea breeze tugged at her dark curls, and she inhaled deeply, hoping to dispel the lingering image of the strangled woman. It was nonsense, of course. She had no history in England, no reason to imagine such horrors. Born in New Zealand, orphaned, young and raised by distant relatives, her life had been one of sunny hills and quiet routines. This house, this town, was as foreign to her as the moon. Yet, as they carried boxes into the hall, her eyes strayed again to the staircase. The vision did not return, but the unease remained, a cold weight in her chest. She glanced at the spot where the woman had lain in her mind's eye, half expecting to see some trace, a scuff on the floor, a stain on the rug. There was nothing, only the pristine order of their new home. That evening, after a simple supper, Gwenda sat by the drawing-room fire, a book unopened in her lap. Giles, sprawled in an armchair, leafed through a local guidebook, planning outings to nearby cliffs and coves. The normalcy of the scene should have soothed her, but the house seemed to hum with secrets, its silence louder than any sound. "Giles," she said abruptly, "did the agent mention who lived here before?" He looked up, surprised. "Not in detail. An elderly couple, I think. Then it stood empty for a bit. Why?" "No reason," she said, her fingers tightening on the book. "Just curious." But as the fire crackled and the shadows danced, Gwenda knew it was more than curiosity. Something in Hillside remembered her, and she feared what it might demand she recall. Chapter 2. The Theatre Incident. The Dilmouth Theatre, a modest Victorian building with faded velvet curtains and a lingering scent of polish, buzzed with anticipation on a balmy Friday evening. Gwenda Reed, dressed in a simple green frock that complemented her dark curls, sat beside Giles in the third row, her programme folded neatly in her lap. They had come to see the Duchess of Malfi, a treat to celebrate their first week in Hillside. The chatter of the audience, locals in their best attire, a few tourists and the occasional rustle of sweet wrappers, created a comforting hum, and Gwenda felt a flicker of her usual cheer. The unease that had plagued her since moving into Hillside had receded, if only for the moment. Giles, ever attentive, squeezed her hand. "Feeling better, darling? You've got some colour back." She smiled, nodding. "It's nice to be out. The house feels heavy sometimes." He chuckled, assuming she meant the unpacking. "We'll have it sorted soon. Then it'll feel like ours." The lights dimmed, and the curtain rose on a stark stage where actors in Jacobean costumes began their tale of betrayal and doom. Gwenda settled into the story, her mind drifting from Hillside's shadows. But as the play reached its tragic peak, a line rang out from the actor playing Ferdinand. "Cover her face. Mine eyes dazzle. She died young." The words pierced Gwenda like a blade. Her breath caught, and the theatre dissolved. In its place, she saw the hall of Hillside, the curving staircase, and at its foot, the same woman from her vision. Blonde, lifeless, her throat marked by brutal hands. A man's voice, cold and deliberate, echoed the line she had just heard, as though he stood beside her. Gwenda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The programme slipped to the floor, and she clutched Giles's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. Heads turned in the dim light, and a woman in the row behind shushed her. Giles leaned close, his voice low. "Gwenda, what's wrong?" I can't," she stammered, her heart pounding. She stumbled to her feet, pushing past knees and coats to reach the aisle. The actors' voices faded as she fled through the heavy doors into the lobby, where the cool air did little to calm her trembling. Giles caught up moments later, his face etched with worry. "Gwenda, talk to me. You're shaking like a leaf." She leaned against the wall, her hands pressed to her face. It was her again, the woman at the stairs. I saw her, Giles, clear as day. And those words, "Cover her face, mine eyes dazzle. She died young. I knew them before he said them. Someone spoke them in our house when she died." Giles frowned, glancing back at the auditorium doors. "You mean the play triggered something? A memory?" "It's not just a memory," she said, her voice rising. "It's real. I saw a murder, Giles, in Hillside, a woman strangled and a man quoting that line." He took her shoulders gently, his practical nature warring with his concern. "Darling, you're overtired. The move, the new place, it's playing tricks on your mind. Maybe you read the play years ago, and it's resurfacing." "I've never read The Duchess of Malfi," she said fiercely, "and I wasn't in England as a child. How could I know this?" Giles hesitated, his usual confidence faltering. "All right, let's get you home. We'll talk it through. Maybe a doctor." "No doctor!" Gwenda snapped, then softened, seeing his distress. "I'm not ill, Giles. I'm haunted by something I shouldn't know." They left the theatre, the laughter and applause fading behind them. The Dilmouth streets were quiet, lit by the soft glow of gas lamps, and the sea whispered in the distance. Gwenda walked in silence, her mind replaying the vision. The woman's pale face, the man's cruel voice. She had no explanation, no link to this place, yet the certainty of what she had seen grew stronger with each step. At Hillside, Giles lit a fire in the drawing-room, insisting she sip a brandy. "We'll figure this out," he said, sitting across from her. "Maybe the house has a history. Old places do. Tomorrow we'll ask around. Neighbours, the agent." Gwenda nodded, staring into the flames. The brandy warmed her, but the chill of the vision lingered. She glanced toward the hall, half expecting to see the woman's body at the foot of the stairs. The house was silent, its secrets locked tight, but Gwenda knew they would not stay buried forever. Chapter 3. Miss Marple's Arrival. The train from Dilmouth to London clattered through the countryside, its rhythm a steady counterpoint to Gwenda Reed's racing thoughts. She sat by the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the green fields and hedgerows blurring past unnoticed. The memory of the theatre incident clung to her like damp fog. The vision of the strangled woman at Hillside staircase, the chilling echo of "Cover her face, mine eyes dazzle, she died young," from the Duchess of Malfi. It had been 3 days since that night, and though Giles had tried to coax her into dismissing it as nerves or imagination, Gwenda knew better. The images were too sharp, too specific to be mere fancy. They were memories, though how she could possess them was a mystery that gnawed at her. Giles sat opposite, his usual cheer subdued. He leafed through a newspaper, but his eyes flicked, to her often, betraying his concern. "You're sure about this, darling?" he asked, folding the paper. "Dragging Raymond into it, I mean. He's a good sort, but he's not exactly practical." Gwenda managed a faint smile. Raymond West, Her cousin was a novelist with a flair for the dramatic and a tendency to pontificate. But he was family, and more importantly, he had connections. "He'll know someone who can help," she said. "I can't keep seeing her, Giles. That woman dead in our house, it's driving me mad." He reached across, squeezing her hand. "We'll sort it. Maybe Raymond's got a friend who knows about, well, visions or old houses." The train slowed as it approached Paddington Station, and Gwenda's resolve hardened. She needed answers, not just for her peace of mind, but to reclaim the joy of their new life in Hillside. The house, with its elegant rooms and sea views, should have been a haven, not a source of dread. In London, they took a taxi to Raymond's flat in Bloomsbury, a cluttered space filled with books, manuscripts, and the faint scent of pipe tobacco. Raymond, tall and lanky with an air of distracted brilliance, greeted them warmly, his wife Joan bustling in with a tray of tea and biscuits. "Gwenda, Giles, what a treat!" he exclaimed, waving them to a sofa. "You've barely settled in. Dilmouth, and here you are. Is it the sea air or something more sinister?" Gwenda hesitated, glancing at Giles. They had agreed not to overwhelm Raymond with the full story at once, but his teasing tone made her blunt. "It's sinister," she said. "I'm seeing things, Raymond. Visions of a murder in our house." Raymond's eyebrows shot up, and Joan paused mid-pour, the teapot hovering. "A murder?" Raymond said, leaning forward. "Do elaborate. This sounds like something out of one of my novels." Haltingly, Gwenda recounted the events. The first vision in Hillside's hall, the woman at the foot of the stairs, the theatre incident where the play's line triggered the same scene, with a man's voice quoting it. She described the clarity of the images, the sense of familiarity, despite her certainty that she had no connection to England before moving there. "It's not imagination," she finished, her voice trembling. "It's real. I know it happened." Joan set the teapot down, her practical nature asserting itself. "Have you seen a doctor, dear? Sometimes stress—" "I'm not ill," Gwenda interrupted, sharper than she intended. "I'm not dreaming or hallucinating. It's a memory, but I don't know how it's mine." Raymond rubbed his chin, his earlier levity gone. "Fascinating. A psychological puzzle, perhaps, or a genuine mystery tied to the house. Have you looked into its history?" "Not yet," Giles admitted. "We thought you might know someone who could help. A detective, maybe, or someone good with odd cases." Raymond's face lit up. "As it happens, I know just the person. My aunt, Jane Marple. She's got a knack for untangling things like this. Lives in St. Mary Mead, a little village, but don't let that fool you. She's sharper than most Scotland Yard men." Gwenda exchanged a glance with Giles. An elderly aunt in a village sounded less promising than a professional investigator, but Raymond's enthusiasm was infectious. "Is she a detective?" Gwenda asked. "Not officially," Raymond said, grinning. "But she solved things that would stump a chief inspector. She sees patterns, you know, in people and places. I'll telephone her. She's in London this week visiting friends." An hour later the doorbell rang, and Joan ushered in Miss Jane Marple. She was a slight figure, her white hair neatly pinned beneath a modest hat, her figure swathed in a soft grey shawl. Her eyes, bright and bird-like, took in the room with a quiet intensity that belied her fragile appearance. A wicker basket hung from one arm, containing knitting and a small tin of biscuits, which she offered to Joan with a murmur of thanks for the invitation. "Gwenda, Giles, this is Aunt Jane," Raymond said, beaming. "Aunt, they've got a proper mystery on their hands." Miss Marple settled into an armchair, her knitting needles clicking softly as she listened to Gwenda's story. She asked no questions at first, her expression one of polite interest, but her eyes missed nothing. The tension in Gwenda's shoulders, the protective way Giles hovered, the faint tremor in Gwenda's voice as she described the murdered woman and the theatre's triggering line. When Gwenda finished, Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her hands folding neatly in her lap. "A most intriguing case, Mrs. Reed," she said, her voice gentle but precise. "Visions of such clarity are rare, but not unknown. They suggest a memory, deeply buried, perhaps from a time you were too young to understand." "But I wasn't in England," Gwenda said, her frustration bubbling up. "I was born and raised in New Zealand. My parents died when I was a baby, and my guardians never brought me here." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, a faint smile touching her lips. "Memories are stubborn, my dear. They do not always obey what we believe to be true. Tell me, have you confirmed your history with your guardians, documents perhaps, or letters?" Gwenda blinked, caught off guard. No, I never had reason to. They told me I was born in New Zealand, and I've always lived there. People tell children many things," Miss Marple said mildly. "Sometimes to protect them, sometimes to protect themselves. I once knew a young woman in St. Mary Mead, Ellen her name was, who believed she'd been born in the village, until a letter from a long-dead aunt revealed she'd spent her first years in London. It changed everything she thought she knew." Giles leaned forward, intrigued. "You think Gwenda might have lived in England, in Hillside even?" "It is possible," Miss Marple said. "A child's mind is a curious thing. It stores what it sees, even if it cannot make sense of it. A traumatic event, a murder, say, might lodge there, waiting for a trigger to bring it forth. The house, the play's words, they are keys, unlocking what was hidden." Gwenda shivered, the idea both unsettling and oddly relieving. If the visions were memories, they could be explained, traced, resolved. "But why now?" she asked. "Why after all these years?" Miss Marple's expression grew grave. "Because you are in the place where it happened, my dear. Hillside is not just a house. It is a witness. And someone, perhaps, does not wish its secrets to be uncovered." Raymond, who had been silent, clapped his hands. "Aunt Jane, you're marvellous. It's like a plot from Poe. What do we do next?" "Do not rush," Miss Marple said firmly. "First, Mr. and Mrs. Reed must investigate Hillside's past. Who lived there? What events occurred? The town hall, local gossips, old newspapers, these will tell you much. And Mrs. Reed, write to your guardians. Ask for specifics of your early years. Dates, places, people. The truth lies in details." Giles nodded, his practical side reasserting itself. "I can start at the town hall tomorrow, and we'll talk to the neighbours. Someone must know about the house." "Good," Miss Marple said, "but be discreet. If a crime was committed, the perpetrator may still be near, watching. People who kill once rarely welcome the past being stirred." Gwenda's stomach twisted, the image of the strangled woman flashing again. "You think the murderer is in Dilmouth?" "I think," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but steely, that evil leaves a shadow, and shadows do not move far from their source. Joan, who had been quietly refilling teacups, spoke up. "Miss Marple, will you help them? You've a gift for this sort of thing." Miss Marple hesitated, her fingers brushing her knitting. "I am no detective, Mrs. West, but I have seen enough of human nature to know when something is amiss. If Mr. and Mrs. Reed wish, I will come to Dilmouth for a few days. A holiday by the sea would do me good, and I can observe." Gwenda felt a surge of gratitude. There was something reassuring about Miss Marple, despite her unassuming air. A quiet strength, like a steel thread woven into lace. "We'd be so grateful," she said. "I don't know what to make of this, but I trust you. Then it is settled," Miss Marple said, picking up her needles. "I shall arrive in Dilmouth on Tuesday. In the meantime, begin your inquiries, but tread lightly. And Mrs. Reed, try to rest. The mind needs strength to face what it has buried." The conversation turned to lighter matters. Raymond's latest novel, Joan's painting. But Gwenda's thoughts remained with Miss Marple's words. A memory from a childhood she didn't know. A house that held secrets. A killer who might still linger. The idea was terrifying, yet it gave her purpose. She would find the truth, no matter how deeply it was hidden. As they left Raymond's flat, the London dusk settling over the streets, Giles took her arm. "Feel better?" he asked. "A little," Gwenda said. "Miss Marple?" "She's not what I expected. She sees things, doesn't she? Things other people miss." Giles chuckled. "She's a bit like a village witch, in the best way. We'll get to the bottom of this, Gwenda. With her help, we can't fail." They hailed a taxi to their hotel, where they would stay before returning to Dilmouth. Gwenda gazed out at the passing lights, her mind turning over Miss Marple's advice. Write to her guardians. Search the houses past. Be cautious. The visions were no longer just a torment. They were a map, leading her to a truth she had carried unknowingly for years, and somewhere, in the quiet streets of Dilmouth, that truth waited, as patient and dangerous as a coiled snake. Back in Bloomsbury, Miss Marple sat alone in Raymond's study, her knitting abandoned. She stared into the fire, her mind sifting through Gwenda's story. A child's memory of murder, a house that stirred it, a line from a play that unlocked it. She thought of St. Mary Mead, of the quiet cruelties she had uncovered there, jealousy, greed, fear, all wearing the mask of respectability. Dilmouth would be no different. Human nature, she knew, was the same everywhere. She murmured to herself, almost inaudibly, a young woman strangled and a man who quoted poetry. Not an ordinary killer. Someone with control, with pride. Someone who believed he could outwit time itself. Her eyes narrowed, and she reached for her knitting. The issue, needles resuming their steady click. Tuesday could not come soon enough. Chapter 4. The Houses Past. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Hillside's dining room, casting delicate patterns on the polished mahogany table where Gwenda and Giles Reed sat over breakfast. The aroma of fresh coffee and Mrs. Cocker's homemade marmalade filled the air, but Gwenda's appetite was absent. Her fork toyed with a piece of toast, her mind still reeling from Miss Marple's visit to London 2 days prior. The elderly spinster's suggestion that Gwenda's visions of a murdered woman might stem from a childhood spent in England, had ignited both hope and dread. If true, it meant her past was a lie, and Hillside held the key to unlocking it. Yet the idea of a killer still lurking in Dilmouth, as Miss Marple had warned, made the house's airy rooms feel oppressively watchful. Giles, ever the optimist, spread marmalade with enthusiasm, his blue eyes bright despite the early hour. "Miss Marple's right," he said, breaking the silence. "We need to dig into Hillside's history. The town hall's our best bet. Property records, old deeds. If something happened here, there'll be a trace." Gwenda nodded, her dark curls catching the light as she sipped her coffee. "I keep thinking about her words. A memory, deeply buried. If I was here as a child, why didn't my guardians tell me? And that woman—" Her voice faltered, the image of the blonde figure at the staircase vivid in her mind. "She feels so real, Giles, like I knew her." He reached across the table, his hand warm over hers. "We'll find out who she was. Today's a start, and when Miss Marple arrives tomorrow, she'll know what to make of it. That woman's got a mind like a steel trap." Gwenda managed a faint smile, grateful for his steadiness. "Let's go, then. The sooner we start, the sooner this stops feeling like a ghost story." They cleared the table and set out for Dilmouth's town hall, a squat red-brick building on the high street, its clock tower chiming 10 as they arrived. The air was crisp, carrying the tang of salt from the nearby sea, and the streets bustled with market stalls and locals exchanging pleasantries. Gwenda felt a pang of envy for their untroubled lives, so unlike her own. Now shadowed by visions she could neither explain nor escape. Inside, the town hall smelled of ink and old paper, its corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced mayors. A clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted them at the records office. "Property records, you say?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. "For Hillside, up on the hill? I'll need the exact address and a year range." "Anything from the last 20 years, Giles said, leaning on the counter. "We're new owners, trying to learn about the place." The clerk disappeared into a back room, returning with a stack of leather-bound ledgers and a bundle of yellowed documents. "These cover Hillside's ownership and transfers. You can look through them here, but don't remove anything. And mind the pages, they're fragile." They settled at a age, long table, the ledgers heavy in their hands. Gwenda opened the first, her fingers tracing columns of neat handwriting. The records were meticulous, detailing sales, mortgages, and renovations. Hillside, it seemed, had changed hands several times since its construction in 1820. By 1907, it belonged to a retired admiral, followed by a series of families, none staying long. Gwenda's pulse quickened as she reached the 1930s, her eyes scanning for anything that might connect to her visions. "Here," Giles said, pointing to an entry in a 1937 ledger. "Hillside was purchased by Major Kelvin Halliday. Lived there with his wife, Helen Halliday, and their infant daughter. Sold in 1938. Gwenda's breath caught. "Helen," she whispered, the name stirring a faint echo in her mind. "Could she be the woman I see? Blonde, young, strangled?" Giles frowned, turning the page. "There's more. A note says Helen Halliday left the premises in July 1938. No mention of death, just that she vanished. The Major sold the house shortly after and left Dilmouth. Vanished." Gwenda's voice rose. drawing a disapproving glance from the clerk. She lowered it, leaning closer. "That doesn't sound right. People don't just vanish. And if she was murdered like I saw—" "Don't jump to conclusions," Giles cautioned, though his own expression was troubled. It could mean anything. She might have run off like the note suggests. There's gossip in small towns. Maybe the neighbours know more. Gwenda flipped through the remaining documents, finding little else. A tax record listed the Hallidays' staff. A cook, a maid, a gardener. But no further mention of Helen's fate. The absence of detail felt deliberate, as if someone had scrubbed the truth from the pages. She closed the ledger, her frustration mounting. "This tells us something happened, but not what. We need more than records." Giles nodded, stacking the books. "Let's try the newspaper archives. If Helen's disappearance was news, it'll be in the Dilmouth Gazette. The library's just down the street." They thanked the clerk and stepped into the sunlight, the weight of their discovery settling over them. Helen Halliday, a young wife, gone without a trace. Gwenda's visions felt less like phantoms now, more like fragments of a puzzle, each piece sharp enough to cut. As they walked, she glanced at the sea, its waves glinting under the noon sun. Dilmouth seemed idyllic, its pastel cottages and cobbled lanes hiding nothing sinister. Yet she knew better. Somewhere in this town, a secret festered, and Hillside was its heart. The Dilmouth Library, a stone building with tall windows, was quieter than the town hall, its air cool and heavy with the scent of aging books. A librarian, Miss Penworthy, a stout woman with a brisk manner, directed them to the newspaper archives in a basement room. "Microfilms the modern way," she said, gesturing to a clunky machine. "The Gazette goes back decades. What years are you after?" 1937 to 1938, Giles said. "Anything about Hillside or the Halliday family?" Miss Penworthy loaded a reel, showing them how to scroll through the flickering images. Gwenda sat before the screen, her hands trembling as she turned the knob. The Gazette's pages unfolded, filled with local events. Fates, fishing disputes, council meetings. At first, the Hallidays appeared only in passing. A notice of Major Halliday's arrival, a mention of Helen hosting a charity tea. But in July 1938, a headline leapt out. "Mystery at Hillside. Young wife disappears." Gwenda read aloud, her voice hushed. "Mrs. Helen Halliday, wife of Major Kelvin Halliday, has left her home under mysterious circumstances. Sources report she departed without notice, leaving her husband and infant daughter. Rumours of an elopement with an unnamed gentleman have circulated, though no confirmation exists. Major Halliday declined to comment, and police have not been involved." Giles leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowed. "Elopement, that's what the town thought. But your vision doesn't fit." Gwenda finished, her heart pounding. "She didn't run off, Giles. She was killed. I saw it." She scrolled, further, finding snippets. A letter to the editor speculating on Helen's character. A brief note that Major Halliday had left Dilmouth. By autumn 1938, the story faded, replaced by harvest festivals and war rumours. Helen Halliday was forgotten, her absence a footnote in the town's memory. Gwenda sat back, her mind racing. It's too neat. A young woman vanishes and everyone assumes she ran away. No investigation, no questions. Someone wanted it that way. Giles rubbed his chin. The Major, maybe. If he was involved. No, Gwenda said firmly. The man's voice in my vision, it wasn't grief-stricken. It was cold, mocking. Whoever killed her enjoyed it. Miss Penworthy approached, her curiosity piqued. Finding what you need? The Halliday business was quite the talk back then. I was a girl, but I remember my mother gossiping. Said Helen was too lively for a soldier's wife, always laughing with other men. Gwenda seized the opening. Did anyone suspect foul play, or know where she went? The librarian shook her head. Not that I heard. Most thought she'd gone off with a lover. Her brother, Dr. Kennedy, swore she'd written him a letter, confessing her plans. But no one saw it, mind you, just his word. Dr. Kennedy? Giles asked, exchanging a glance with Gwenda. Her half-brother, Miss Penworthy said, lived a few miles out in Westcliff. Doctor, well respected though, a bit standoffish. He's still there, retired now. Gwenda's pulse quickened. A brother, close to Helen, claiming she'd eloped. It was a thread, thin but tangible. Thank you, she said, forcing a smile. That's helpful. They left the library. The microfilm's images burned into Gwenda's mind. Helen Halliday, vibrant and young, erased from Dilmouth's story. Dr. Kennedy, her brother, holding the only evidence of her fate, a letter no one else had seen, and Gwenda's own visions, tying her to a crime she couldn't have witnessed. Or could she? Back at Hillside, they sat in the drawing-room, the fire crackling as evening fell. Gwenda curled up on the sofa, a shawl around her shoulders, while Giles paced, his energy undimmed. We've got something solid now, he said. Helen Halliday lived here, disappeared, and your visions match her description, blonde, young. It's no coincidence. But why me? Gwenda asked, her voice small. Miss Marple thinks I was here as a child, but my guardians never mentioned. England. I need to write to them, like she said. If I lived here, they'd know. Giles stopped pacing, his expression softening. Do it tonight. Cable them. Ask for details, dates, places. If you were in Dilmouth, it explains everything. She nodded, rising to fetch paper and pen. The act of writing felt like a lifeline, a way to anchor her spiralling thoughts. She drafted a concise message to her guardians in New Zealand, requesting specifics of her early years, especially any time spent in England. As she sealed the envelope, a wave of exhaustion hit her. The day's discoveries had clarified nothing, only deepened the mystery. Giles sat beside her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. We're getting closer, darling. Tomorrow, Miss Marple arrives. She'll know what to do with this. Helen, the brother, all of it. Gwenda leaned into him, the fire's warmth a small comfort. She said to be cautious. If Helen was murdered, someone covered it up. Dr. Kennedy, maybe, or someone we haven't found yet. Leave that to Miss Marple, Giles said, kissing her forehead. She's got her nose for trouble, and we've got each other. They sat in silence, the house creaking softly around them. Gwenda's eyes drifted to the hall, where the staircase loomed in shadow. No vision came, but the memory of the strangled woman lingered, her face a silent plea. Helen Halliday, Gwenda thought, her name now a talisman. Whoever had taken her life had buried the truth, but Hillside remembered, and so somehow did Gwenda. As she climbed the stairs to bed, the envelope to New Zealand clutched in her hand. She felt the house watching, its walls heavy with secrets. Tomorrow, Miss Marple would come, and the real work would begin. But tonight, Gwenda knew sleep would elude her, chased away by the ghost of a woman she had never known, yet could not forget. Chapter 5. A Childhood Clue. The morning mist hung low over Dilmouth, shrouding hillside in a veil of grey that softened its sharp Georgian lines. Inside, Gwenda Reed stood at the drawing-room window, a telegram in her trembling hands. It had arrived an hour ago, its terse words shattering the narrative of her past. Her guardians in New Zealand, responding to her urgent cable, had revealed a truth she had never suspected. She had not been born in New Zealand, nor had she spent her entire childhood there. At the age of 3, she had lived in England with her father, Kelvin Halliday, following her mother's death. For a brief period in 1937, their home had been Dilmouth, Hillside itself. The revelation was a key, unlocking the visions that had haunted her. The strangled woman at the staircase, the man's voice quoting the Duchess of Malfi. They were not phantoms, but memories, etched in a child's mind. Gwenda's dark curls fell loose around her pale face as she reread the telegram, her heart a tumult of shock and clarity. Giles, pacing the room with his usual restless energy, stopped to study her. "You're sure you're all right, darling?" he asked, his voice gentle but laced with concern. "It's a lot to take in." She looked up, her green eyes wide. "I was here, Giles, in this house. I must have seen something. Helen Halliday's murder. That's why the visions feel so real. I was in Hillside when it happened." Giles crossed to her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "It explains everything. Your connection to the house, the staircase, the words from the play. You were a witness, even if you didn't understand it then. But why didn't they tell me?" Gwenda's voice cracked, a mix of anger and betrayal. "My guardians! They let me believe I'd always been in New Zealand. Why hide it?" Giles frowned, rubbing his chin. "Maybe they thought it was kinder. You were so young. If your father was caught up in something, like Helen's disappearance, they might have wanted to shield you." Gwenda folded the telegram, tucking it into her cardigan pocket. "Shield me from what? A murder. I need to know more about my father, about Helen, about what I saw." She glanced toward the hall, where the staircase stood, its polished banister gleaming in the dim light. The visions had not returned since the theatre, but the weight of her new knowledge made the house feel alive, its walls whispering truths she was only beginning to grasp. Miss Marple was due to arrive at noon, and Gwenda clung to the thought of her calm, incisive presence. The elderly spinster, with her knack for seeing through human nature's disguises, would know how to unravel this tangle. Until then, Gwenda resolved to act. "We should look through the house," she said abruptly. "If I lived here, there might be something, a toy, a book, anything I left behind, proof I was here." Giles's face lit up, eager for action. "Good idea. The attic's a likely spot. Old houses like this collect relics, and we haven't explored it properly since we moved in." They climbed the stairs to the attic, a narrow door at the end of the upper landing, revealing a steep staircase. The air grew musty as they ascended, the scent of dust and aged wood enveloping them. The attic was a cavern of shadows, its sloping ceiling criss-crossed with beams. Trunks, crates, and forgotten furniture cluttered the space, draped in cobwebs that shimmered in the light from a single dormer window. Gwenda's pulse quickened, a sense of familiarity tugging at her, though she could not place it. "Where to start?" Giles asked, rolling up his sleeves. "There's enough junk here for a museum." Gwenda scanned the room, her gaze settling on a battered trunk in the corner, its leather straps cracked with age. "That one," she said, an instinct guiding her. "It feels right." They dragged the trunk into the light, its hinges creaking as Giles pried it open. Inside lay a jumble of relics, moth-eaten shawls, a cracked mirror, a bundle of faded letters tied with ribbon. Gwenda sifted through them, her fingers brushing a small, cloth-bound book. She lifted it, her breath catching. It was a child's picture book, The Tale of Peter Rabbit, its cover worn but intact. Opening it, she found a childish scrawl on the flyleaf. "Gwenda Halliday, age 3. "Look," she whispered, showing Giles. "It's mine. I was here." He took the book, his expression a mix of awe and unease. "Halliday, that's your father's name. And the date, 1937. It fits." Gwenda clutched the book to her chest, a tangible link to the past she hadn't known existed. "I read this here, in Hillside, maybe in the nursery, or by the fire. And if I was here, I could have seen Helen." Her voice trailed off, the image of the strangled woman resurfacing, her blonde hair fanned across the floor. Giles resumed searching, pulling out a wooden box from the trunk. Inside were children's toys, a tin soldier, a rag doll, a set of wooden blocks. Gwenda reached for the doll, its painted face chipped but familiar. "I remember this," she said softly. "I called her Daisy. I'd forgotten until now." The attic seemed to close in, its shadows heavier with each discovery. Gwenda's childhood, once a distant blur, was taking shape, and with it the certainty that she had witnessed something terrible. "We need to find out more about Helen," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "The records said she vanished, but my visions say murder. We can't wait for Miss Marple to do it all." Giles nodded, closing the trunk. "Agreed. Let's talk to the neighbours. Someone old enough to remember 1937 might know about the Hallidays. And that Dr. Kennedy, the librarian, mentioned, Helen's brother. He's still in Westcliff. We could visit him." Gwenda hesitated, Miss Marple's warning echoing in her mind. "Be discreet. The perpetrator may still be near." Dr. Kennedy's name had surfaced too often. His claim of a letter, his role in Helen's story. "Not yet," she said. "Let's start with the neighbours. They'll be less guarded." They descended to the drawing-room, where Mrs. Cocker, the daily help, was dusting the mantel. A stout woman with a no-nonsense air. She had lived in Dilmouth all her life, and was a font of local law. Gwenda seized the chance. "Mrs. Cocker," she said, keeping her tone light, "do you know anything about the people who lived here before us? Back in the 1930s, maybe?" Mrs. Cocker paused, her cloth hovering. "The 1930s? Let me think. There was the Admiral, old Grimsby, but he was earlier. Oh yes, the Hallidays, nice couple, though it ended badly. She ran off, they said, left her husband and baby." Gwenda's heart skipped. "Baby, you're sure?" "Oh, aye," Mrs. Cocker said, nodding. "A little girl, toddling about. I was a young maid then, working down the road. Saw her playing in the garden once, with a nanny. Poor mite, losing her mother like that." Giles leaned forward, casual but intent. What was Mrs. Halliday like? Helen, wasn't it? Mrs. Cocker's eyes gleamed with the relish of gossip. Pretty thing, blonde and lively, always singing or laughing. Some thought her flighty, mind you. Too fond of attention, especially from gentlemen. When she vanished, folk weren't surprised. Said she'd gone off with a lover. Her brother, the doctor, backed it up. Dr. Kennedy, Gwenda said, keeping her voice steady. Did you know him? Not well, Mrs. Cocker admitted. Kept to himself, he did. Lived in Westcliff, came to visit her often. Bit stern, but devoted to his sister. After she left, he told everyone she'd written him, saying she was starting fresh. Broke the Major's heart, it did. Gwenda exchanged a glance with Giles. The story was consistent. Too consistent, as if rehearsed. Did anyone doubt it? She asked. Think she hadn't run off? Mrs. Cocker shrugged, resuming her dusting. A few whispered. My friend Mary, who worked at the greengrocer's, said Helen wasn't the type to abandon her child. But there was no proof, and the police didn't care. She was gone, and that was that. Thanking Mrs. Cocker, Gwenda led Giles to the garden, needing air. The mist had lifted, revealing the sea's distant sparkle. She clutched the picture book, its weight grounding her. It's all fitting together, she said. I was the baby. My father was Major Halliday. Helen was his wife, my stepmother maybe, and I saw her die. Giles kicked at a pebble, his jaw tight. If she was your stepmother, it makes sense you'd remember her so vividly. A child would be traumatized seeing that. But we need proof. The telegram's a start, but we need to know more about your father, and what happened after Helen vanished. Gwenda nodded, her resolve hardening. I'll write again. Ask for more details. And we should talk to someone who knew them closely. Not Kennedy, not yet. Someone like the nanny Mrs. Cocker mentioned, or the maid. The garden gate creaked, and they turned to see Miss Marple approaching, her grey shawl fluttering in the breeze. She carried her wicker basket, her expression serene, but her eyes sharp as she took in their tense faces. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Reed," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I arrived early and thought to find you here. You've been busy, I see." Gwenda's relief was palpable. "Miss Marple, you're here. We've found something big." She poured out the story, the telegram, the attic discoveries, Mrs. Cocker's gossip. She showed her the book, the doll, the scrawl of her name. "I lived here," she finished, her voice trembling. "I was in Hillside when Helen Halliday disappeared. I saw her murdered." Miss Marple listened, her knitting needles idle in her lap as she sat on a garden bench. Her face betrayed no surprise, only a deepening focus, as if she were fitting pieces into a mental mosaic. "Remarkable," she said at last, her tone measured. "Your guardian's silence is telling. It suggests they knew something of the tragedy and wished to spare you. As for Helen Halliday, your visions align with the facts. Her youth, her blonde hair, her sudden absence, but we must tread carefully. A murder covered so neatly implies a clever mind." Giles sat beside her, eager for guidance. "What's our next step? We were thinking of finding the nanny or maid. They might know more." "A wise choice," Miss Marple said, her eyes narrowing. "Servants see what families hide. But first, confirm your father's story. Your guardians may have letters, diaries, anything from Major Halliday. and seek out Dr. Kennedy's role. His letter from Helen is too convenient, don't you think? In St. Mary Mead, I knew a man who forged a will to secure an inheritance. He was believed until the ink betrayed him. Gwenda shivered, the garden's warmth no match for the chill of suspicion. You think Kennedy lied? That he killed her? I think, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but steely, that devotion can twist into something darker. A brother who controls his sister's life might not bear her leaving it. But we need evidence, not guesses. Find the maid, yes, and ask about Kennedy's visits, his mood, his words. And Mrs. Reed, guard your memories. They are your strength, but also your danger. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the mist. Gwenda felt a surge of purpose, tempered by fear. Her childhood, once a blank canvas, was now a map to a crime, and Hillside its centre. With Miss Marple's guidance, she would follow it, no matter where it led. But as she looked at the house, its windows glinting like eyes, she wondered what else it remembered, and who might fear its truths coming to light. Chapter 6. The Old Servants. The late afternoon light bathed Dilmouth in a golden glow, softening the edges of its cobbled streets and pastel cottages. Gwenda Reed and Giles walked briskly toward the village of Lower Dill, a cluster of homes too, miles from Hillside, where Miss Marple had suggested they seek out Lily Kimble, a former maid from the Halliday household. The revelations of the past days, the telegram confirming Gwenda's childhood in Hillside, the attic treasures bearing her name and Mrs. Cocker's tales of Helen Halliday's disappearance, had sharpened their purpose. Gwenda's visions of a strangled woman, once a haunting mystery, now pointed to a crime she had witnessed as a toddler. Helen, her father's wife, was the victim, and the truth lay buried in the memories of those who had known her. Gwenda clutched a small notebook where she jotted details from their findings, Helen's lively nature, her sudden vanishing in 1938, and Dr. Kennedy's claim of a letter proving she'd eloped. Miss Marple, now settled in a guest room at Hillside, had urged them to find Lily Kimble, emphasizing that servants often held the unvarnished truth. "They see the cracks in a family's facade," she'd said, her knitting needles clicking like a metronome. "But be gentle, Mrs. Reed. Old wounds reopen easily." The path to Lower Dill wound past meadows dotted with grazing sheep, the air sharp with the scent of salt and wildflowers. Gwenda's dark curls bounced as she walked, her green eyes fixed on the horizon. "I keep thinking about Lily," she said, breaking the companionable silence. "If she worked for my father and Helen, she might have seen me too. A little girl, playing in the house. Maybe she knows what happened that night." Giles, his sandy hair ruffled by the breeze, nodded. She could have seen Kennedy too. If he was as involved as Mrs. Cocker says, Lily might have noticed something odd. A maid would know if he was too possessive. Gwenda shivered, despite the warm sun. Miss Marple's hint about devotion turning dark had lodged in her mind. Dr. Kennedy, Helen's half-brother, loomed large in the story. A respected doctor, yet perhaps a man who could not bear his sister's independence. "We'll have to be careful," she said. "If Lily knows something dangerous, she might not want to talk." They reached Lower Dill, a hamlet of stone cottages with tidy gardens. Lily Kimble's address, gleaned from a chatty postman, led them to a small house with roses climbing its walls. A woman in her late 50s answered the door, her figure stout, her grey hair pulled into a tight bun. Her eyes, sharp and wary, sized them up. "Yes," she said, her tone clipped. "What's this about?" "I'm Gwenda Reed, and this is my husband, Giles," Gwenda said, offering a warm smile. "We live at Hillside now, and we're trying to learn about its history. We heard you worked there in the 1930s for the Hallidays." Lily's expression hardened, her hand tightening on the doorframe. "That was a long time ago. Why do you care?" "We're curious about the family," Giles said smoothly, "especially Helen Halliday. There's so little in the records, and we thought you might remember her." Lily hesitated, then stepped back, gesturing them inside. "Come in, then. But I've not much to say. It was a sad business, and I don't like dwelling on it." The parlour was modest, with a worn sofa and a shelf of chipped china. A kettle steamed on the stove, and Lily busied herself making tea, her movements brisk but guarded. Gwenda and Giles sat, exchanging a glance. Lily's reluctance was palpable, a wall they'd need to breach with care. As Lily poured tea, Gwenda tried a softer approach. "It must have been a lovely house to work in. I found a child's book in the attic, with my name on it. Gwenda Halliday. I think I was the little girl there, with my father, Major Halliday." Lily's hand paused, the teapot wavering. "You're the Major's daughter," she said, her voice softening. "I remember you, just a mite, always toddling after your nanny. You had a doll you carried everywhere. Daisy, you called her." Gwenda's heart leapt, the memory of the rag doll from the attic vivid. "That's right. I found her too. So I was there. With Helen?" Lily nodded, setting the teapot down. "You were. Mrs. Halliday. Helen was kind to you. Used to read you stories, even when the Major was away. She was a bright one, always singing, her blonde hair shining like gold, not like some stuck-up ladies, but—" She trailed off, her lips pursing. "But what?" Giles prompted, leaning forward. Lily glanced at the window, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "There was trouble. Not her fault, mind. She loved the Major, I'd swear to it. But others, they wanted her attention. Men, mostly. And her brother, Dr. Kennedy, he was always about, watching her like a hawk." Gwenda's pulse quickened. "Dr. Kennedy? Was he protective?" "Too much," Lily said, her voice low. He'd come to Hillside unannounced, sit in the parlour with her, talking low. I heard him once, telling her she shouldn't be so free with her smiles. Said it wasn't proper for a married woman. She laughed it off, but I could see it wore on her. He didn't like her being happy, if you ask me." Giles exchanged a look with Gwenda, his eyes narrowing. Did he ever seem angry or threatening? Lily hesitated, stirring her tea. Not outright, but there was a coldness to him. Once I was cleaning the hall, and I heard them arguing. She said she wanted to go to London, maybe for good. He said she'd regret it, that he wouldn't let her shame the family. His voice, it gave me chills. Gwenda's hands tightened in her lap, the vision of the strangled woman flashing in her mind. "Lily, when Helen disappeared, what did you think? The papers said she eloped, but you said she loved my father." Lily's face darkened, her fingers twisting a napkin. "I never believed she ran off. She adored that little girl, you and the Major. Why leave them? I told the cook, Mrs. Brandt, it wasn't right. but Dr. Kennedy came round after, said he'd had a letter from her, confessing she'd gone with some man. He was so sure, so calm, everyone believed him, even the Major, though it broke him. "Did you see the letter?" Giles asked, his tone casual but intent. "No," Lily admitted. "No one did, just his word. And he was a doctor, respectable. Who'd question him? But I always wondered, why burn a letter like that? He said he did, to spare the Major's feelings." Gwenda's breath caught, Miss Marple's warning about convenient evidence echoing. Did anything strange happen before she vanished? Anything out of place? Lily leaned back, her eyes distant. "The night before, I was tidying the drawing-room late. Helen was there, alone, writing a letter. She looked scared, not her usual self. I asked if she was all right, and she said, 'Lily, sometimes you don't see the cage until it's locked.' I didn't know what she meant, but it stuck with me. Next day, she was gone." Gwenda's heart pounded, the words resonating with her visions. A cage, Kennedy's control, perhaps. "Did you tell anyone?" she asked. "I tried," Lily said bitterly. "Told Mrs. Brandt, but she said I was fanciful. After the Major left, I quit. Couldn't bear the house without her. It felt wrong, like it knew something we didn't." They sat in silence, the weight of Lily's story settling over them. Gwenda felt a surge of gratitude, mixed with fear. Lily's account painted a picture of Helen as a woman trapped, her brother a shadow over her life. The letter, the lack of proof, it all pointed to a cover-up. One Gwenda's childhood memory had preserved. "Thank you, Lily," she said, rising. "You've helped more than you know. If you remember anything else, will you tell us?" Lily nodded, her expression softening. "For you, little Gwenda, I will. You were a sweet child. I'm glad you're back, even if it's for this." They left the cottage, the sun dipping toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. Gwenda clutched her notebook, where she'd scribbled Lily's words. "It's him, isn't it?" she said, her voice low. "Kennedy. He didn't want Helen to leave. He killed her." Giles took her arm, his face grim. "It fits. The letter, his control, her fear. But we need more. Lily's story isn't proof, and Miss Marple said to be cautious. If Kennedy's guilty, he's clever. He's kept this hidden for 18 years. They walked back to Hillside, the sea's murmur a faint backdrop to their thoughts. At the house, Miss Marple sat in the drawing-room, her shawl draped over her shoulders, a cup of tea in hand. Her eyes, bright and piercing, met theirs as they entered. "You've found something," she said, setting the cup down. "I can see it in your faces." Gwenda recounted Lily's story, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. She described Helen's vibrancy, Kennedy's possessiveness, the mysterious letter, and the chilling words about a cage. Giles added details, his tone measured but urgent. "It's too neat, Miss Marple," he said. "Kennedy's the only one who claimed Helen eloped, and no one saw the letter. He's hiding something." Miss Marple listened, her knitting untouched, her expression one of quiet concentration. When they finished, she leaned back, her fingers steepled. "A compelling picture," she said, her voice soft but precise. "Mrs. Halliday was a woman of spirit, caught in a net of someone's making. Dr. Kennedy's role is troubling. A letter no one saw, a story too readily accepted. It suggests a mind accustomed to control, perhaps to deception. Gwenda sat across from her, the fire's glow warming the room. You think he killed her, don't you? Because she wanted to leave? Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, a glint of steel beneath her gentle demeanour. I think, Mrs. Reed, that love can be a dangerous thing when it demands possession. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a young man who adored his sister so fiercely he drove away her suitors, believing no one worthy. When she defied him, his rage was catastrophic. Dr. Kennedy may be such a man, but we lack proof, and without it we risk alerting him. Giles paced, his energy barely contained. What do we do? Confront him? Search for the letter? Not yet, Miss Marple said firmly. Confrontation is a last resort. First, find others who knew the Hallidays. The nanny, perhaps, or the gardener. They may corroborate Lily's account. And Mrs. Reed, your memories are key. The staircase, the voice, the words from the play. They are clues locked in your mind. Try to recall more. A detail, a face, a sound could be vital. Gwenda nodded, though the thought of delving deeper into her visions unnerved her. I'll try, but it's frightening, not knowing what I'll see. Miss Marple's smile was kind but resolute. Fear is a sign you're close to the truth, my dear, and truth, once faced, loses its power to harm. The evening deepened, the house settling into silence. Gwenda sat by the fire, her notebook open, Lily's words a map to the past. Helen, trapped and fearful, had left a mark on Hillside, and Gwenda, a child in her shadow, had carried it forward. With Miss Marple's guidance, they would unearth the rest. But the path felt perilous, each step closer to a man who had silenced his sister, and might silence them too. Chapter 7. Dr. Kennedy's Shadow. The coastal road to Westcliff wound through rolling hills, the sea a shimmering expanse to the left, its waves whispering secrets beneath the late morning sun. Gwenda Reed sat in the passenger seat of their modest Morris, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Giles drove with a focused calm that belied the tension between them. The decision to visit Dr. James Kennedy, Helen Halliday's half-brother, had been made that morning, spurred by Lily Kimball's troubling account of his possessive nature and the mysterious letter no one had seen. Miss Marple, sipping tea in Hillside's drawing-room, had approved the plan but cautioned restraint. Observe him, Mrs. Reed," she'd said, her eyes sharp over her knitting. "A guilty man reveals himself in small ways, too much certainty, too little feeling. But do not provoke him, not yet." Gwenda's mind churned with the weight of their discoveries. The telegram from her guardians had confirmed her childhood in Hillside, tying her to the Halliday family, and the night Helen vanished. The attic's relics, her book, her doll, proved she'd lived there, a toddler witness to a crime her mind had buried. Lily's story painted Helen as a vibrant woman, caged by her brother's control, her disappearance too neatly explained by his tale of an elopement. Gwenda's visions, the blonde woman strangled at the staircase, a man's voice quoting, "Cover her face, mine eyes dazzle, she died young," were no longer mere hauntings, but fragments of truth, pointing to Kennedy as the shadow over Helen's fate. "Are you sure about this, darling?" Giles asked, glancing at her as the car rounded a bend. His sandy hair caught the sunlight, but his blue eyes held a flicker of unease. "Kennedy's no fool. If he's hiding something, he won't welcome us poking around." Gwenda nodded, her dark curls brushing her shoulders. "I know, but Lily's words keep ringing in my head. Helen was scared, Giles. She talked about a cage. And Kennedy's letter. It's too perfect, like a story he wanted everyone to believe. We need to see him, hear his version. Maybe he'll slip." Giles gripped the wheel, his jaw tightening. "Miss Marple's right about watching him. He's our man. He's kept this secret for 18 years. He'll be careful. But those cold eyes Lily mentioned, I don't like the thought of you near him." "I'll be fine," Gwenda said, forcing a smile. "We're just curious newcomers, asking about the house. Nothing to alarm him." But her heart thudded, the memory of the vision's mocking, voice chilling her. Kennedy, with his doctor's respectability, was no ordinary suspect. If he had killed Helen, he was a man who could weave lies as deftly as Miss Marple's knitting needles wove wool. They reached West Cliff, a scattering of stone houses perched above cliffs. The seas roar louder here. Kennedy's home, a grey-gabled structure set back from the road, loomed like a sentinel, its windows dark against the weathered stone. A neatly trimmed lawn and a row of hollyhocks gave it an air of quiet respectability. But Gwenda felt a prickle of unease as they parked. The house seemed to watch them, its silence heavier than the sea's murmur. Giles knocked, and after a moment the door opened to reveal Dr. James Kennedy. He was tall and gaunt, in his late 50s, with thinning grey hair and eyes of a pale, piercing blue. His face, lined but composed, held a polite curiosity, though his smile was thin, barely touching his eyes. "Yes," he said, his voice smooth, but guarded. "May I help you?" "I'm Giles Reed, and this is my wife Gwenda," Giles said, extending a hand. "We've just bought Hillside in Dilmouth. We heard you knew the Hallidays, who lived there years ago. We're curious about the house's history." Kennedy's eyes flicked between them, a fleeting shadow crossing his face before the smile returned. "A Hillside, yes. A fine house. I knew Helen Halliday, my half-sister, and her husband. Come in, please. I can spare a few minutes." He led them into a parlour, its dark furniture and heavy curtains absorbing the light. A fire burned low in the grate, casting flickering shadows on shelves lined with medical texts and a few framed photographs. One caught Gwenda's eye. A young woman, blonde and radiant, laughing at the camera. Helen, she thought, her throat tightening. The resemblance to her vision was unmistakable. They sat on a stiff sofa, Kennedy taking an armchair opposite. He steepled his fingers, his gaze steady but unreadable. "What exactly do you want to know about Hillside?" he asked. "It's been years since I was there." Gwenda took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "We found some old things in the attic, a child's book, toys. They had my name on them from 1937. I think I lived there with my father, Major Halliday. We're trying to piece together what happened to his wife, Helen." Kennedy's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened slightly. A movement so subtle, Gwenda might have missed it without Miss Marple's advice to watch closely. "You're Kelvin's daughter?" he said, his tone even. "I remember. A little girl, yes. You were very young. As for Helen, it's a sad story. She left quite suddenly in 1938. Ran off with another man, I'm afraid. Broke poor Kelvin's heart." Giles leaned forward, his voice casual. "That's what we heard. But it's odd, isn't it? Leaving her daughter, her home, without a word to anyone but you." Kennedy's smile tightened, a flash of irritation in his eyes. "Not so odd, Mr. Reed. Helen was impulsive. She wrote to me, confessing her plans. She'd fallen for someone, wanted a new life. I tried to dissuade her, but she was headstrong, always was." "May we see the letter?" Gwenda asked, her voice soft but direct. "It would help us understand her, for the house's history." Kennedy's gaze hardened, though his tone remained polite. "I'm afraid that's impossible. The letter was destroyed years ago, in a house fire. A pity, but I've no reason to keep such things. It was painful enough at the time." Gwenda's heart sank, though she'd expected the excuse. Miss Marple had warned that convenient losses often hid lies. She glanced at the photograph of Helen, its frame polished to a gleam. "She looks happy there," she said, nodding at it. "Hard to imagine her abandoning everything." Kennedy followed her gaze, his expression softening for a moment. Almost wistful. She could be happy, yes, too happy sometimes. She drew people to her, men especially. It caused complications. I tried to guide her as her brother, but she didn't always listen. "Guide her?" Giles asked, his tone light but probing. "You mean keep her from trouble?" Kennedy's eyes flicked to him, a glint of steel beneath the calm. "Precisely. A married woman must be careful. Helen was too free, too trusting. I feared she'd ruin herself, and in the end she did." Gwenda felt a chill, Lily's words echoing. He didn't like her being happy. Kennedy's voice held no grief, only a faint disdain, as if Helen's fate was her own fault. She pressed further, her instinct overriding caution. Some people didn't believe she ran off. They thought something might have happened to her. Here, in Dilmouth, Kennedy's fingers stilled, his face a mask of control. But Gwenda caught the slightest tightening of his jaw. "Gossip," he said curtly. "Small towns thrive on it. There was no evidence of harm. The police were satisfied, as was Kelvin, eventually. Helen made her choice, and I've made peace with it." The room grew heavy, the fire's crackle the only sound. Gwenda wanted to push harder, to ask about the argument Lily overheard, the cage Helen feared, but Miss Marple's warning held her back. Kennedy was too composed, too ready with answers. Provoking him now could close doors they needed open. Giles sensed the tension and stood, offering a disarming smile. "Well, thank you, Dr. Kennedy. It's helpful to hear from someone who knew her. We'll let you get on. If you remember anything else about Hillside, we'd love to know." Kennedy rose, his politeness impeccable. "Of course. I wish you well with the house. It's a fine place, despite its history." He ushered them to the door, his eyes lingering on Gwenda a moment too long, as if measuring her. Outside, the sea air was a relief, cleansing the parlour's stifling atmosphere. Gwenda exhaled, her hands trembling as they walked to the car. "He's lying," she said, her voice low. "That letter never existed, and the way he talked about Helen, like she deserved it. It's him, Giles. I know it." Giles opened the car door for her, his face grim. "I agree. He's hiding something. Did you see his hands? Steady as a rock, but gripping that chair like he was holding himself in. And that fire story. Too convenient. But we've got nothing solid yet." As they drove back to Dilmouth, Gwenda's mind raced. Kennedy's cold certainty, his lack of sorrow, fit the voice in her vision, mocking, cruel. Yet his respectability, his calm, made him untouchable without proof. She thought of Miss Marple, waiting at Hillside, and felt a surge of hope. The old woman's insight would cut through Kennedy's facade like a knife through silk. At Hillside, they found Miss Marple in the garden, pruning roses with a pair of small shears. Her grey shawl was pinned neatly, her hat shading her eyes, but her posture was alert, as if she'd sensed their return. "You've seen Dr. Kennedy," she said, not looking up, "and you're troubled. Tell me everything." They sat on a wrought-iron bench, the rose's scent mingling with the sea's tang. Gwenda recounted the visit, mimicking Kennedy's smooth tone, his evasive answers, the destroyed letter. Giles described his subtle tension, the photograph of Helen, the disdain in his voice. "He's too perfect," Giles said, "like he's rehearsed it for years." Miss Marple snipped a wilted bloom, her movements precise. "A dangerous man," she murmured, "not in temper, but in control. Such men believe they can outwit fate itself. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a solicitor charming and composed who poisoned his wife for her money. His only mistake was a single lie, too polished to be true. Dr. Kennedy's letter is such a lie, I suspect." Gwenda leaned forward, her voice urgent. "What do we do? He won't admit anything, and there's no letter to find. But I know he killed her. My visions, they're Helen at the stairs, with his voice." Miss Marple set the shears down, her eyes meeting Gwenda's. "Your visions are a gift, Mrs. Reed, but also a burden. They tell us Helen was murdered, and Dr. Kennedy is the likely hand. But we need evidence, a witness, a document, a trace of his actions. The nanny, perhaps, or the gardener from that time. They may have seen him at Hillside that night." Giles nodded, his energy rekindled. "We'll track them down, and I'll check the Westcliff records. Maybe there was a fire, or maybe he's lying about that too." "Good," Miss Marple said, her tone firm. "But be discreet. Dr. Kennedy is a man who guards his secrets. If he suspects you're close, he may act to protect himself. And Mrs. Reed, try to recall more of that night. A detail, a scent, a sound could unlock the rest." Gwenda shivered, the garden's warmth no match for the chill of memory. "Well, try, but it's like walking into a fog. I see her, hear him, but the rest is shadows." Miss Marple's smile was kind but resolute. "Shadows clear, my dear, when you face them. And we shall, together." The sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Gwenda stood, her resolve hardening. Kennedy's shadow stretched long, but Hillside's secrets were stirring, and her childhood memories were the key. With Miss Marple's guidance, they would find the truth, though each step felt like a dance with danger, the killer's eyes perhaps already upon them. Chapter 8. The Garden Discovery. The garden at Hillside bloomed with late summer vigour, its roses and lavender swaying in the soft breeze that carried the distant murmur of the sea. Yet, as Gwenda Reed wandered its paths, her footsteps crunching on the gravel, the beauty felt distant, overshadowed by the weight of her discoveries. The past week had unravelled her life like a skein of wool. The telegram revealing her childhood in Hillside, the attic relics tying her to the Halliday family, Lily Kimball's tales of Helen's fear, and Dr. Kennedy's chilling composure. Her visions of a blonde woman strangled at the staircase, a man's voice quoting the Duchess of Malfi, were now certain memories, fragments of a murder she'd witnessed at 3 years old. Helen Halliday, her father's wife, was the victim, and Kennedy, her controlling half-brother, the likely killer. But certainty was not proof, and Miss Marple's counsel to seek evidence had driven Gwenda to the garden, where instinct told her secrets lingered. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the lawn, and Gwenda's dark curls caught the golden light as she paused near a rose bed, its blooms overgrown and tangled with weeds. She had not slept well, her dreams haunted by the staircase and Helen's lifeless face. Giles was in Dilmouth, chasing leads on the Hallidays' former nanny, while Miss Marple sat in the drawing-room, her knitting a steady rhythm as she sifted their findings. Gwenda, restless and alone, had come outside, drawn by a nagging sense that Hillside itself held answers. The house, with its creaking floors and watchful silence, had preserved her memories. Perhaps the garden, too, kept traces of that night. She knelt by the rose-bed, her hands brushing the earth, cool and damp beneath the foliage. As her fingers sifted through the soil, a memory flickered, not the violent clarity of her visions, but a softer, childlike fragment. A small voice, her own, giggling, "Monkey's paws! Monkey's paws!" The words were nonsense, yet they tugged at her, tied to this spot. She dug deeper, her nails scraping dirt, driven by a compulsion she couldn't name. The earth yielded, and her fingers struck something hard, a metal object, rusted and small. She pulled it free, brushing away the soil to reveal a toy monkey, its tin body dented, its jointed arms designed to clack like paws. The paint was faded, but the shape was unmistakable, a relic from her toddler years. Gwenda's breath caught, her heart racing. "It's mine," she whispered, clutching the toy. The memory sharpened, herself, barely 3, burying the monkey in this very bed, her small hands patting the earth. Why? The answer hovered just out of reach, tied to fear, to hiding. Chiok stood, the toy heavy in her hand, and ran to the house, her skirt catching on thorns. Miss Marple needed to see this. Her insight would unlock its meaning. Inside, the drawing-room was warm, the fire crackling softly. Miss Marple sat in an armchair, her grey shawl draped over her shoulders, her knitting needles pausing as Gwenda burst in. "Miss Marple, look," Gwenda said, holding out the monkey. "I found it buried in the garden. It's mine from when I was a child. I remembered burying it, saying, 'Monkey's paws.' I think it's connected to that night." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her bird-like eyes gleaming with interest. She took the toy, turning it over in her delicate hands. "Remarkable," she murmured. "A child's treasure, hidden with purpose. Tell me, Mrs. Reed, what did you feel when you found it?" Gwenda sank onto the sofa, her hands trembling. "Fear," she said. "Not now, but then. I was hiding it, like I was afraid someone would find it. And the words, 'Monkey's paws,' they were a game, but also a secret. I think I saw something, Miss Marple, something about Helen." Miss Marple nodded, her expression grave but calm. Children bury things to forget, or to protect. In St. Mary Mead, a boy once hid his sister's locket in a flower bed. after she ran away. He couldn't bear her absence, but he also feared what he'd seen, her lover's temper. Your monkey, Mrs. Reed, may be such a talisman. You buried it here, in this garden, because it was tied to what you witnessed. Gwenda's throat tightened, the vision of Helen's body flashing anew. You mean the murder? I was in the garden that night, wasn't I? Hiding, maybe, when it happened. Quite possibly, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but precise. A child, awake when she shouldn't be, might slip outside, see something through a window, or hear voices. The staircase is visible from the garden through the hall window. You may have seen Helen's fate and buried your toy to escape. It. Gwenda shivered, the toy's rusted edges biting into her palm. But why the monkey? Why not something else? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her tone remained serious. Children choose what matters to them. This monkey was yours, a companion. Burying it was an act of sacrifice, perhaps to keep a secret safe. Tell me, do you recall anything else? A sound, a face, anything from that moment? Gwenda closed her eyes, willing the memory to surface. The garden, the night, the toy in her, small hands. A voice, low, angry, drifted through the fog of her mind. Not the mocking quote from her visions, but something sharper. A command. Stay away, it said, or perhaps don't look. Her eyes snapped open, her breath uneven. There was a voice, she said. A man's, not the one from the staircase. It was warning me, telling me to stay away. I think I was near the house, looking in. Miss Marple leaned forward, her gaze piercing. A warning voice, separate from the killer's, most intriguing. It suggests someone else was present, or that the killer feared being seen. This is vital, Mrs. Reed. Your memory is unlocking piece by piece. The door opened and Giles entered, his face flushed from the walk back from Dilmouth. I found the nanny's name, Edith Paget, but she's moved to Exeter, he said, then stopped, sensing the tension. What's happened? Gwenda, you're pale. She held up the monkey, her voice unsteady. I found this in the garden. I buried it when I was 3, Giles. I remembered it. Monkey's paws. Miss Marple thinks it's tied to Helen's murder. I was there, in the garden, and I heard a voice telling me to stay away. Giles took the toy, his brow furrowing as he examined it. Good Lord, this is yours, from that night? He looked at Miss Marple, his energy barely contained. What does it mean? Is it evidence? Not evidence in a court, Miss Marple said, her tone measured, but a clue, certainly. It places Mrs. Reed at the scene outside, where she saw or heard something significant. The voice she recalls suggests another presence, or the killer's awareness of her. We must consider the garden's role. If Helen was killed in the house, why was Mrs. Reed outside? And why bury the toy there? Giles sat beside Gwenda, his hand finding hers. Could she have been hiding? Maybe she ran out, scared, and saw it through the window, like you said. Precisely, Miss Marple said, her knitting resuming its soft click. The garden bed is near the hall window, which offers a clear view of the staircase. A child, frightened by raised voices, might flee outside, peer in, and witness the act. Burying the toy was her way of sealing that memory. Gwenda's mind raced, the pieces aligning. So I saw Kennedy, or someone kill Helen, and I buried the monkey to forget it. But why didn't I tell anyone? My father, the nanny. Miss Marple's expression softened, a rare warmth in her eyes. You were 3, my dear. A child's mind protects itself. You may have tried to speak, but adults often dismiss such things as fancy. Or you were too afraid, especially if the voice warned you. Fear silences even the bravest. Giles leaned forward, his voice urgent. What do we do with this? It's not enough to go to the police, but it's something. Should we dig more in the garden? Maybe there's other evidence. Miss Marple shook her head, her needles pausing. Not yet, Mr. Reed. Digging risks alerting the wrong person. Dr. Kennedy, if he is our man, is clever and watchful. He has kept his secret for 18 years, and he will not hesitate to act if threatened. Instead, we must find others who were there. Edith Paget, the nanny, or the gardener. They may recall that night, or Mrs. Reed's behaviour after. Gwenda nodded, though the thought of reliving her memories daunted her. I'll try to remember more. The voice, the garden, it's clearer now, but still foggy. And Edith, she might know if I was upset or said anything strange. Giles squeezed her hand, his optimism returning. I'll track down Edith in Exeter, and I'll ask around about the gardener. Someone in Dilmouth must know where he went. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her gaze steady. Good. But be cautious, both of you. The garden has given us a clue, but it has also stirred the past. In St. Mary Mead, I once saw a man uncover a hidden letter, only to find the writer watching from the shadows. Dr. Kennedy may sense your progress. Do not approach him again until we have more. Gwenda's stomach twisted, the toy monkey on the table a stark reminder of her childhood fear. You think he knows we're looking. He was so calm when we saw him, but his eyes, they followed me. Miss Marple's lips pursed, a faint frown creasing her brow. A man who kills to keep control does not rest easily. He may appear calm, but inside he is vigilant. Your visit to Westcliff was a pebble in his pond, Mrs. Reed. The ripples will reach him. The fire crackled, its warmth no match for the chill of Miss Marple's words. Gwenda looked at the monkey, its rusted form a bridge to the night she'd lost Helen. The garden had yielded one secret, but others waited, perhaps deeper in the earth, or in the memories of those who'd served Hillside. She felt the house's presence, its walls holding her past like a locked diary. With Miss Marple's guidance, she would open it, though each page turned brought her closer to a man whose shadow stretched long and cold. As dusk settled, Giles lit the lamps, and they planned their next steps. Gwenda would write to her guardians, again seeking details of her father's life after Helen's disappearance. Giles would pursue Edith Paget and the gardener, while Miss Marple would stay, her quiet presence a steady anchor. The garden, now cloaked in twilight, seemed to watch them through the windows, its roses swaying like silent sentinels. Gwenda knew she would return to it, to dig not just in earth, but in her own mind, where the truth of Helen's death lay buried, waiting to be freed. Chapter 9. The Trap. The twilight air in Dilmouth carried a crisp edge, the sea's distant murmur blending with the rustle of leaves in Hillside's garden. Gwenda Reed stood by the drawing-room window, her reflection faint against the darkening glass, her mind a whirl of dread and determination. The past days had woven a tight net around her childhood memories. The telegram confirming her time in Hillside, the attic relics of her toddler years, Lily Kimball's tales of Helen Halliday's fear, Dr. Kennedy's evasive calm, and the rusted, toy monkey unearthed from the garden, a talisman of the night she'd witnessed Helen's murder. Each discovery pointed to Kennedy, Helen's controlling half-brother, as the man who'd strangled her. His claim of an elopement letter a lie to mask his crime. Yet proof remained elusive, and Miss Marple's warning to tread carefully echoed in Gwenda's ears. A killer who'd silenced his sister 18 years ago would not hesitate to protect his secret now. Miss Marple sat by the fire, her grey shawl draped over her shoulders, her knitting needles clicking with a rhythm that belied the gravity of their discussion. Giles, restless as ever, paced the room, his sandy hair catching the lamplight. The toy monkey lay on the table, its dented form a stark reminder of Gwenda's buried memory. A child's act of hiding tied to the night Helen died. Miss Marple had called it a clue, not evidence, but its discovery had shifted their approach. "We must draw him out," she'd said that morning, her eyes sharp. "Dr. Kennedy is too clever to betray himself unprompted. A trap, carefully set, may loosen his guard." The plan, devised over tea, was simple yet perilous. Gwenda would write to Kennedy, claiming she'd found something in the garden, evidence of Helen's fate, and intended to dig further. The letter would be vague, hinting at knowledge without revealing it, designed to stir his fear. Giles would hide in the garden that night, watching the rosebed where the monkey was found, to see if Kennedy took the bait. Miss Marple would remain in the house, observing from the shadows, her presence a quiet anchor. "A guilty man will act," she'd said. "He may come to ensure nothing is found, or to destroy what he fears you've uncovered." Gwenda's hands trembled as she sealed the letter, its words carefully crafted. "Dear Dr. Kennedy, I found something disturbing in Hillside's garden, near the rosebed, that suggests Helen's disappearance was not as you described. I bid you, and at Itcombe, plan to dig there tomorrow. If you know anything, please advise. Yours, Gwenda Reed." She handed it to Giles, who'd arranged for a boy in Dilmouth to deliver it to Westcliff by dusk. "Do you think he'll come?" she asked, her voice low. Giles paused, his blue eyes meeting hers. "If he's guilty, he won't be able to resist. That letter's like a match to dry grass. But I'll be ready, darling. He won't get near you." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her expression serene but steely. "Be vigilant, Mr. Reed. A man like Dr. Kennedy does not panic, but he calculates. If he comes, he will be cautious, perhaps armed. Stay hidden, and do not confront him alone." Gwenda's stomach twisted, the image of Kennedy's pale, piercing eyes haunting her. His smooth denial of the letter, his cold disdain for Helen's memory, fit the mocking voice in her visions. Yet the thought of luring him to Hillside, of facing the man who'd killed her stepmother, made her skin crawl. "What if he doesn't come?" she asked. "What if he ignores it?" "Then we learn something else," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but firm. "A man who ignores such a challenge is either innocent or supremely confident. Either way, his response will guide us. In St. Mary Mead, I once saw a poacher caught not by his theft, but by his refusal to check a trap he knew was set. Dr. Kennedy's choice will speak volumes. The clock struck 7, and Giles left to arrange the letter's delivery, promising to return by 9 to take his post in the garden. Gwenda sat with Miss Marple, the fire's glow casting flickering shadows on the walls. The house felt alive, its silence heavy with anticipation, as if it too awaited Kennedy's move. Gwenda's fingers traced the toy monkey, its rusted joints a link to the night she'd buried it, fleeing a truth too vast for a child to grasp. "Miss Marple," she said, breaking the quiet, "do you think I saw him that night? Kennedy, I mean. The voice in the garden telling me to stay away. It wasn't the same as the one at the staircase. Could there have been someone else?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes narrowing. "A pertinent question, Mrs. Reed. Your memory suggests 2 voices, one cruel, quoting the play, and another warning you. It may be Kennedy, shifting his tone to frighten a child, or another presence, perhaps complicit, perhaps merely a witness. The garden's role is key. You were outside, seeing, through the hall window, when Helen fell. The warning voice may have come from someone protecting you, or themselves." Gwenda shivered, the memory of that night sharpening. The garden, dark and vast to her toddler eyes, the hall window glowing, Helen's body at the stairs. The warning voice, low, urgent, had sent her scrambling to the rosebed where she'd buried the monkey. "I was so scared," she whispered, "not just of what I saw, but of being caught. I think I knew he'd hurt me too." Miss Marple's expression softened, a rare warmth in her gaze. "You were brave, my dear, to carry such a memory and survive it. Your mind protected you, locking it away until you were ready. Now it is unlocking, and we shall use it to find justice for Helen." Giles returned, his face flushed from the chill. "The letter's on its way," he said, rubbing his hands by the fire. "The boy promised delivery by 8. If Kennedy acts, it'll be late when he thinks we're asleep. I'll set up in the shrubbery by 10. Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their click. "Good. Take a torch, but keep it off unless necessary. And Mr. Reed, if he comes, do not engage. Him, watch, listen, and return to us. We need his actions, not a confrontation." Giles grinned, his optimism undimmed. "Don't worry, Miss Marple. I'll be a ghost out there. He won't know I'm watching." The hours crawled by, the house settling into a tense hush. Gwenda tried to read, but the words blurred, her mind fixed on the garden. At 10, Giles slipped outside, clad in a dark coat, his footsteps fading into the night. Gwenda stood by the window, her breath fogging the glass, while Miss Marple sat in the shadows, her knitting a quiet presence. The clock ticked, each second stretching into eternity. Near midnight, a faint rustle broke the silence. Gwenda's heart leapt, her eyes straining through the darkness. The garden was a maze of shadows, the rosebed barely visible under the moon's thin light. Then a figure emerged from the path, a tall, gaunt silhouette moving with deliberate care. Gwenda's pulse raced. Kennedy! He carried a spade, its blade glinting as he approached the rosebed. He paused, glancing at the house, his face a pale blur in the moonlight, then began to dig, the earth yielding with soft thuds. Miss Marple rose, silent as a cat, and joined Gwenda at the window. "He's come," she whispered, her voice steady. As I thought. He fears what you've found, Mrs. Reed. See how he works. Methodical, not frantic. A man who plans. Gwenda's hands clenched, her fear mingling with triumph. He's digging where I found the monkey. He thinks there's evidence. Maybe something he buried with Helen. Before Miss Marple could reply, a shadow moved in, the shrubbery. Giles, stepping forward, his torch flashing on. "Kennedy!" he called, his voice sharp. "What are you doing here?" Kennedy froze, the spade dropping with a clatter. His face, caught in the torch's beam, was a mask of shock, quickly hardening into composure. "Mr. Reed," he said, his voice smooth but strained, "I received your wife's letter. I was curious, that's all. I thought to check the garden myself to spare you trouble." "Curious?" Giles said, stepping closer, his tone edged with disbelief. "At midnight, with a spade? That's a strange kind of curiosity." Kennedy's eyes darted to the house, and Gwenda shrank back, her heart pounding. Miss Marple's hand touched her arm, a silent reassurance. "Stay calm," she murmured. "He's caught, but he'll talk his way out if we let him." Outside, Kennedy straightened, his voice regaining its polish. "I understand it looks odd, but Helen's disappearance was painful for me. Your letter suggested evidence, and I couldn't rest, thinking something might be here. I meant to tell you if I found anything." Giles held his ground, the torch unwavering. "You didn't think to call? Or come tomorrow? You're digging like you know what's there, Kennedy." Kennedy's smile was thin, almost a sneer. "You're mistaken, Mr. Reed. I'm no thief. If you doubt me, call the police. I've nothing to hide." Miss Marple's grip tightened on Gwenda's arm. "He's bold," she whispered. "Too bold. He knows the police would find nothing. We must act now, before he slips away." Gwenda nodded, her fear giving way to resolve. She stepped to the door, opening it to the cool night air. "Dr. Kennedy," she called, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "You're not welcome here. Leave, or we'll call the authorities." Kennedy turned, his eyes locking on hers, a flicker of something, anger, fear, crossing his face. "Mrs. Reed," he said, his tone icy, "you're making a mistake. Digging up the past helps no one. Let Helen rest." Miss Marple emerged behind Gwenda, her small figure commanding in the doorway. "Let her rest, Dr. Kennedy," she said, her voice clear and cutting. "Or let your secret rest. You came to destroy evidence, did you not? Something buried in that bed, perhaps, from the night Helen died." Kennedy's composure cracked, his hands clenching. "You're a meddling old woman!" he snapped, then caught himself, his smile returning. "I've done nothing wrong. You've no proof, only fantasies. Good night." He turned, striding down the path, the spade left in the dirt. Giles started after him, but Miss Marple's voice stopped him. "Let him go, Mr. Reed. We have what we need. His fear, his presence. He's shown his hand." Giles returned, his face flushed with adrenaline. "He was digging right where you found the monkey, Gwenda. He knows something's there, or was. We should search it now." Miss Marple shook her head, her eyes on the garden's shadows. "Not tonight. He may watch or return. Tomorrow, in daylight, with witnesses. For now, we know he's guilty. His actions betray him, as I suspected they would." Gwenda sank onto the sofa, her body trembling with the aftershock of confrontation. "He was so calm," she said. "Even caught, he didn't panic. But his eyes, they hated us." Miss Marple resumed her seat, her knitting in hand, though her needles lay still. "A man like Dr. Kennedy does not panic, Mrs. Reed. He controls, even in defeat. But we have shaken him. He came to protect his secret. Perhaps a trace of Helen's fate he buried long ago. We must find it, and quickly, before he acts again." Giles locked the door, his energy barely contained. "What's next? The police? Or do we dig ourselves?" Miss Marple's smile was faint but resolute. "The police soon, but not yet. We need something tangible, a witness, a relic. The nanny, Edith Paget, may know of that night. And the garden must be searched, but with care. Dr. Kennedy is cornered, and a cornered man is dangerous. In St. Mary Mead, I saw a farmer, guilty of theft, lash out when his lies unravelled. We must be ready for his move." The fire burned low, its glow casting the toy monkey in stark relief. Gwenda stared at it, her childhood fear now a weapon. The trap had worked, exposing Kennedy's guilt, but the game was not over. Hillside's secrets were stirring, and the man who'd silenced Helen was watching, his shadow closer than ever. With Miss Marple's guidance, Gwenda would face him, though each step felt like a dance on a knife's edge, the truth sharp enough to cut. Chapter 10. The Confession. The dawn broke over Dilmouth with a fragile clarity, the sea's gentle shimmer a stark contrast to the turmoil that had gripped Hillside the previous night. Gwenda Reed stood in the drawing-room, her hands clasped tightly, her dark curls framing a face pale with sleeplessness. The trap they'd set for Dr. James Kennedy, her letter claiming evidence in the garden, Giles's vigil in the shrubbery, Miss Marple's watchful presence, had yielded a damning result. Kennedy had come at midnight, spade in hand, digging frantically where Gwenda had unearthed her childhood toy monkey, his actions betraying a desperate need to conceal something buried there. Caught by Giles's torchlight, he'd woven a flimsy excuse, his composure cracking under Miss Marple's piercing accusation. Yet, as the morning light filtered through the lace curtains, Gwenda felt no triumph, only a gnawing dread. Kennedy's cold eyes, his calculated retreat, lingered in her mind, a reminder that a man who'd killed once could kill again. Miss Marple sat by the fire, her grey shawl neatly pinned, her knitting needles idle for once. Her expression was serene, but her eyes held a steely resolve, as if she sensed the delicate thread they now walked. Giles paced the room, his sandy hair dishevelled, his energy barely contained. The toy monkey rested on the table, its rusted form a silent witness to Gwenda's memory of that fateful night 18 years ago, when she, a toddler, had seen Helen Halliday strangled at the staircase, a man's voice quoting the Duchess of Malfi. The pieces of the puzzle, her childhood in Hillside, Lily Kimball's tales of Kennedy's possessiveness, the absent letter, the garden's buried clue, pointed to Kennedy as Helen's killer, but proof remained just out of reach. "We've got him rattled," Giles said, stopping to lean against the mantel. "He came to dig up something, evidence, maybe even Helen's body. His story about curiosity was nonsense. But what now? He's slipped away, and we've nothing to take to the police." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her gaze fixed on the fire. "Dr. Kennedy is a man of control, Mr. Reed, but last night we saw his fear. He believes something incriminating lies in that rosebed, something he could not risk you finding. We must search it carefully with witnesses, but first we need more. His actions are a confession of intent, but not of deed. We require a witness or a trace of Helen's fate to bind him." Gwenda's voice trembled as she spoke. "He looked at me last night, Miss Marple, when I called him out. His eyes, they hated me. I think he knows I'm remembering that I saw him that night. What if he comes back?" Miss Marple's hand reached out, resting lightly on Gwenda's. "He may try, my dear, but we are prepared. A man who acts in the dark fears the light. We shall keep you safe, and we shall find the truth. Your memory is our greatest weapon. Its clarity grows with each step. Tell me, last night, did anything new surface? A sound, a detail from the garden?" Gwenda closed her eyes, willing the fog of her toddler years to clear. The garden, the hall window, Helen's body at the stairs. The warning voice, "Stay away," echoed, distinct from the mocking quote. "The voice," she said, her eyes opening. "The one telling me to stay away. It was outside near the window. I was crouching by the roses, holding the monkey. I think I saw a shadow move inside, not just Helen, but someone else, tall, like Kennedy." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, a spark of triumph in their depths. "A shadow, inside the house. This is significant, Mrs. Reed. It places the killer at the scene, and your warning voice, perhaps Kennedy, perhaps another, suggests you were close to being seen. We must find who else was in Hillside that night. The nanny, Edith Paget, or the gardener may know." Giles nodded, his resolve hardening. "I've got a lead on Edith. She's in Exeter, working as a housekeeper. I'll drive there today. And the gardener, Mrs. Cocker mentioned a Tom Riley, still in Dilmouth. I'll track him down too." "Good," Miss Marple said, her tone firm. "But we must also press Dr. Kennedy. His visit last night shows he's vulnerable. A second push, subtle but direct, may force a mistake. I propose a meeting here, under the guise of discussing your letter. Invite him, Mrs. Reed, and let him see you unafraid. His reaction will tell us much." Gwenda's stomach churned at the thought of facing Kennedy again, but Miss Marple's steady gaze bolstered her. What if he refuses to come? Or worse, if he tries something? Miss Marple's smile was faint but resolute. "He will come, my dear, because he cannot resist knowing what you've found. And he will not act openly, not yet. Men like Dr. Kennedy thrive in shadows, not daylight. Mr. Reed will be here, and I shall watch from the wings. In St. Mary Mead, I once lured a thief to a village fete, thinking he'd steal again. His greed betrayed him, as Kennedy's fear will betray him." Gwenda drafted a new letter, her hand steadier now. "Dear Dr. Kennedy, your visit last night was unexpected. I've found more in the garden, and I must know the truth about Helen. Please come to Hillside this afternoon at 3. We only seek answers. Yours, Gwenda Reed." Giles arranged for its delivery, his face set with determination. "I'll be back from Exeter by 2, he said, kissing her forehead. "Stay with Miss Marple, darling. You're not alone in this." As Giles left, Gwenda sat with Miss Marple, the drawing-room a cocoon of warmth against the morning's chill. The older woman resumed her knitting, the needle's soft click a counterpoint to Gwenda's racing thoughts. "Miss Marple," she said, "why do you trust my memory so much? I was only 3. What if I'm wrong? If it wasn't Kennedy?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes meeting Gwenda's with a quiet intensity. "A child's mind is a clear lens, Mrs. Reed, unclouded by doubt or pretense. You saw what you saw, and your visions, the staircase, the voice, the garden, are too precise to be fancy. In St. Mary Mead, a girl of 5 once told me her father smelled of bad apples before he left her mother. It was the scent of his mistress's perfume, a clue no adult noticed. Your memories are such clues, and they point to truth." The clock struck noon, and Gwenda busied herself with small tasks, her nerves taut as a bowstring. At 2, Giles returned, his face flushed with news. "Edith Paget's in Exeter, all right," he said, shedding his coat. "I spoke to her, by telephone. She remembers you, Gwenda, and Helen. Said you were a quiet child, but after Helen vanished, you stopped talking for days, just clutched your doll and stared at the staircase. She thought you were grieving, but now it sounds like shock." Gwenda's throat tightened, the memory of her silence a new weight. Did she see Kennedy that night? She wasn't sure, Giles said. He often visited, but she was off duty in her room. She did say he was at Hillside the day before, arguing with Helen. She heard him say, "You'll not leave me." And Helen laughed, but nervously. Miss Marple's needles stilled, her lips pursing. Another thread, Mr. Reed. His possessiveness is clear, and your silence, Mrs. Reed, confirms you saw something traumatic. We are close, very close. At 3, the doorbell rang, and Gwenda's heart leapt. She opened the door to find Kennedy, his gaunt frame filling the doorway, his pale blue eyes as cold as the sea. He wore a dark suit, his posture rigid, but a faint tremor in his hand betrayed his unease. "Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice smooth but edged, "your letter was insistent. I came to clear any misunderstanding." "Please, come in," Gwenda said, her voice steady despite her fear. She led him to the drawing-room, where Giles stood by the fire, his stance protective, and Miss Marple sat, her knitting resumed, her presence deceptively frail. Kennedy's eyes flicked to her, a flash of irritation crossing his face, but he sat, his hands folded. "You mentioned evidence," he said, his tone clipped. "I assure you, there's nothing to find. Helen left of her own accord. Your letter and last night's incident suggest you believe otherwise. I'd like to know why." Gwenda took a breath, her resolve bolstered by Miss Marple's quiet nod. "I found a toy in the garden, Dr. Kennedy. A monkey I buried as a child, the night Helen disappeared. I was there in Hillside, and I saw something. Her at the stairs, dead. I think you know what happened." Kennedy's face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened, knuckles whitening. "A child's toy?" "A fanciful memory, Mrs. Reed. You were 3, hardly a reliable witness. Helen wrote to me confessing her elopement. I told you the letter was lost." Miss Marple's voice cut through, soft but razor-sharp. "Lost, Dr. Kennedy, or never existed. You came to the garden last night, digging where Mrs. Reed found her toy. Why, if you believe her memory's fanciful." Kennedy's eyes narrowed, his composure fraying. "I was concerned, nothing more. Your accusations are baseless, madam. I loved my sister. I would never harm her. Gwenda leaned forward, her voice trembling but firm. She was afraid, Doctor. Kennedy. Lily Kimble heard you argue, heard her talk of a cage. Edith Paget said you told her she'd never leave you. And I saw you, or someone that night. You can't lie to my memories. The room fell silent. The fires crackled deafening. Kennedy's face twitched, a crack in his mask, and then, like a dam breaking, his voice rose, raw and jagged. "You know nothing!" he spat, standing, his hands clenched. "Helen was mine, my sister, my responsibility. She wanted to throw it all away, to run off with some fool to shame us. I begged her, warned her, but she laughed. I couldn't let her go. I stopped her." Gwenda froze, her breath catching. Giles stepped closer, his body tense, ready to act. Miss Marple's needles lay still, her eyes locked on Kennedy, unyielding. "You stopped her," she said, her voice calm but relentless. "You strangled her, Dr. Kennedy, at the foot of the stairs and staged her disappearance. The letter was a forgery, was it not?" Kennedy's shoulders slumped, his face crumpling, not with remorse, but with the weight of a secret long held. "Yes," he whispered, sinking back into the chair. "I wrote it. She was going to leave, to ruin everything. I followed her to Hillside that night, pleaded with her. She mocked me, said she was free. I lost control. My hands were on her throat before I knew it. She fell and I quoted the play, like a fool. I didn't mean to kill her." Gwenda's vision blurred, tears stinging her eyes. The mocking voice, the blonde woman. Helen's death was real, her memory true. "You buried her," she said, her voice breaking. "In the garden, didn't you? That's why you came last night." Kennedy's eyes, wild now, met hers. "Not there. I moved her later to a cliffside grave far from Dilmouth. No one would find her. But the garden, I buried her locket there, a mistake. I thought you'd found it." Miss Marple's voice was a quiet thunder. "And the child, Dr. Kennedy? You knew she saw you, didn't you? A little girl, watching through the window." Kennedy's gaze darted to Gwenda, a flicker of fear in his eyes. "I saw her, outside, staring. I warned her to stay away, thinking she was too young to understand. She ran, and I let her go. She couldn't have remembered, not after all these years. But she did," Miss Marple said, her tone unyielding. "And her memory has undone you." Kennedy's face twisted, a mix of defiance and despair. "You've no proof," he said, his voice hoarse. "My word against hers. The police will laugh at you." Giles stepped forward, his voice cold. "Not when we find the locket and the cliffside grave. You've told us where to look, Kennedy. It's over." The fight drained from Kennedy, his body sagging. "Do what you will," he muttered. "I've carried it too long. Helen's gone, and I'm empty." Miss Marple rose, her small figure commanding. "Mr. Reed, telephone the police. Dr. Kennedy will wait here. He knows escape is futile." Giles nodded, moving to the hall, while Gwenda stared at Kennedy, her heart a storm of grief and relief. Helen's killer sat before her, unmasked by her childhood memory. His confession, a weight lifted yet a wound reopened. Miss Marple's hand touched her shoulder, a silent strength. "You've done it, my dear," she said. Helen can rest now, and so can you. The police arrived within the hour, their boots heavy on Hillside's floor. Kennedy went quietly, his face a mask once more, though his eyes avoided Gwenda's. As they led him away, she stood by the window, the toy monkey in her hand, its rusted paws a symbol of the truth she'd reclaimed. The house felt lighter, its shadows softer, as if Helen's spirit had finally found peace. Chapter 11. The Final Piece. The morning sun rose over Dilmouth with a quiet radiance, its golden rays piercing the mist that clung to Hillside's garden and casting long, gentle shadows across the lawn. Inside the drawing-room, Gwenda Reed stood by the bay window, her dark curls catching the light, her hands clasped tightly as she gazed at the sea's distant shimmer. The events of the previous day, Dr. James Kennedy's confession, his admission to strangling Helen Halliday, and staging her disappearance had left her both relieved and hollow. The visions that had haunted her, of a blonde woman dead at the staircase, and a man's mocking voice quoting the Duchess of Malfi, were no longer mysteries but truths, etched in her toddler memory from 18 years ago. Kennedy, Helen's possessive half-brother, had crumbled under Miss Marple's relentless gaze, revealing not only his crime, but the location of Helen's body, hidden in a cliffside grave far from Dilmouth. Yet, as the house settled into an unfamiliar peace, Gwenda felt a lingering unease, as if one piece of the puzzle remained missing. Giles sat at the breakfast table, his sandy hair tousled, his blue eyes scanning the morning's Dilmouth Gazette. The headline was restrained but clear. Local doctor arrested in connection to 1938 disappearance. He folded the paper, his voice steady but tinged with awe. "It's real, Gwenda. Kennedy's in custody, and the police are searching the cliffs today. Your memory did this, brought justice for Helen." Gwenda turned, her green eyes clouded with emotion. "I know, Giles. It's what we wanted. But I keep thinking, why didn't I remember sooner? I was there in the garden watching through the window. If I'd told someone, my father, the nanny, maybe Kennedy wouldn't have gotten away with it for so long." Miss Marple, seated in her usual armchair, set her knitting aside, her grey shawl neatly pinned. Her bird-like eyes, sharp and compassionate, met Gwenda's. "You were a child, Mrs. Reed, barely 3. The mind protects itself, locking away what it cannot bear. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a boy who saw his father strike his mother but spoke of it only years later, when he was safe. Your silence was not failure, but survival. And now you have given Helen her voice." Gwenda managed a faint smile, the weight of Miss Marple's words easing her guilt. She sat across from Giles, her fingers tracing the edge of the toy monkey on the table. Its rusted paws, a relic of the night she'd buried it to escape her fear. The garden discovery, the trap that lured Kennedy, his desperate midnight digging, all had led to his confession. But the cliffside grave was the final piece, the physical proof to seal his guilt. "What happens now?" she asked. "The police will find her, won't they? And then it's over?" Miss Marple's lips pursed, her gaze drifting to the fire. "The police are thorough, my dear. Dr. Kennedy's directions were precise, born of a man who no longer saw escape. They will find Helen's remains, and with them the locket he mentioned, buried first in the garden, and moved to conceal his crime. but we must ensure no detail is missed. A man like Kennedy, even cornered, may have left traps of his own, a lie within his truth to muddy the waters. Giles leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "You think he's still hiding something?" he confessed, Miss Marple. "Said he strangled her, quoted the play, buried her. What's left?" Miss Marple's needles resumed their soft click, a counterpoint to her measured tone. "Confessions, Mr. Reed, are not always complete. A man who kills to control does not surrender all his secrets willingly. He told us of the locket, the grave, but there may be more. Perhaps another witness he silenced, or evidence he destroyed. We must confirm every detail, especially the warning voice Mrs. Reed heard in the garden. It was distinct from the killer's, suggesting another presence that night." Gwenda's heart quickened, the memory of the low, urgent stay-away resurfacing. It had come from outside, near the hall window, as she crouched by the roses, clutching her monkey. The killer's voice, Kennedy's quoting the play, had echoed from inside, cruel and deliberate. "You're right," she said, her voice trembling. "There was someone else. I've always felt it. But who? The nanny was in her room. The gardener wasn't there. Could Kennedy have had an accomplice?" Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, a glint of steel beneath her gentle demeanour. Or an accomplice, or an unwilling witness. Someone who saw or suspected and was silenced by fear or loyalty. We must speak to Edith Paget again, and Tom Riley, the gardener. Their memories may hold the key to this shadow figure. Giles stood, his energy rekindled. "I'll go to Exeter today. Edith's agreed to meet me. And I'll find Riley. He's still in Dilmouth, working at the vicarage. If anyone saw something that night, it's them." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting steady. "Good. But be discreet, Mr. Reed. Dr. Kennedy's arrest will stir gossip, and gossip may reach ears that prefer silence. Mrs. Reed, you might revisit your memories gently. The warning voice, the garden's details. Try to recall the air, the sounds. Sometimes the smallest fragment unlocks the whole." Gwenda agreed, though the thought of delving deeper into that night unnerved her. She spent the morning in the garden, walking the rose bed where she'd found the monkey, hoping to stir her mind. The sea breeze carried gulls' cries, and the rose's scent mingled with damp earth. But no new memories surfaced, only the same vivid flash. Helen's body, the mocking voice, the warning shadow. Frustrated, she returned to the house, where Miss Marple was writing a letter, her pen scratching softly. "Any luck, my dear?" Miss Marple asked, looking up. "Nothing new," Gwenda admitted, sinking onto the sofa. "It's like a wall in my mind. I see Helen, hear the voices, but the rest is dark." Miss Marple set her pen down, her expression kind but probing. "Patience, Mrs. Reed. Your mind is a garden too, and memories bloom when ready. Tell me, when you heard the warning voice, was there a scent, perhaps? Or a sound beyond the words?" Gwenda closed her eyes, focusing. The garden, the window, the fear. "There was tobacco," she said, her voice hesitant. "A whiff of it, like a pipe. My father smoked one, but he wasn't there. And a creak, like a gate or a step on gravel." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Tobacco and a creak. Small things, but telling. The gardener, Tom Riley, was known to smoke a pipe, I believe Mrs. Cocker mentioned. If he was in the grounds that night, he may have seen you. Or Kennedy. and spoken to keep you safe." Gwenda's pulse raced, the possibility electrifying. "Tom Riley? You think he warned me? But why not tell anyone?" "Fear, perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone grave. "A gardener is no match for a doctor's influence, or loyalty to the Hallidays, wanting to spare your father pain. We shall ask him when Mr. Reed finds him." Giles returned at dusk, his face weary but triumphant. He sank into a chair, accepting the tea Gwenda poured. "Edith Paget was a gold mine," he said. "She's frail now, but her memory's sharp. She confirmed Kennedy's visits were frequent, often unannounced. The night Helen vanished, she heard a row, Helen shouting, 'I'm done with your chains!' And Kennedy's voice, low and furious. Edith stayed in her room, thinking it a family matter. But she saw Kennedy leave at dawn, his coat muddy, his face like stone." Gwenda's breath caught. "Muddy? From the garden, maybe, where he buried the locket." "Likely," Giles said, nodding. "And she said you, Gwenda, were different after that night. You wouldn't go near the staircase, kept muttering 'bad man' and hiding your toys. She thought it was grief, but now it's clear. You were terrified." Miss Marple's needles paused, her lips pursing. A child's fear, pointing to Kennedy and the muddy coat, another thread. Did she see anyone else that night? "No," Giles said, "but she mentioned Tom Riley. He was odd after Helen's disappearance, kept to himself, stopped smoking his pipe for weeks, like he was shaken. She thought he'd fancied Helen, maybe took her leaving personally." Gwenda's heart leapt, the tobacco scent vivid in her memory. "Miss Marple, that's it. The pipe smoke, the creak. Tom was there, in the garden. He warned me to stay away, to protect me." Miss Marple's smile was faint but satisfied. "Well done, Mrs. Reed. Mr. Reed, you must find Tom Riley at once. His silence may have been fear or guilt for not acting. He holds the final piece, I believe." Giles left for the vicarage, where Tom Riley worked, returning an hour later with the gardener in tow. Tom was a wiry man in his 60s, his face weathered, his hands calloused from years of toil. His eyes, wary but kind, flickered with unease as he sat, twisting his cap. "I don't know what you want," he said, his voice gruff. "That business with Mrs. Halliday was long ago." Gwenda leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Tom, I was the little girl at Hillside, Gwenda Halliday. I found my toy monkey in the garden, where I buried it the night Helen died. I think you were there, in the garden. I smelled your pipe, heard you tell me to stay away. Please tell us what you saw." Tom's face paled, his hands stilling. You remember that," he whispered. "Lord, I thought you were too young. I didn't mean no harm, miss. I was checking the sheds late when I saw you by the window staring in. I smelled trouble, heard a row inside Mrs. Halliday and that doctor, her brother. I told you to stay away, to keep you safe." Miss Marple's voice was soft but commanding. "What did you see, Mr. Riley, through the window, with the child?" Tom swallowed, his eyes distant. "I looked in after I'd sent her off. Mrs. Halliday was at the stairs, on the floor, not moving. Dr. Kennedy was over her, his hands. They'd been round her throat. He was muttering something about dazzling eyes like a poem. I froze, didn't know what to do. He was a doctor, a big man in town. Who'd believe me, a gardener? I ran, kept my mouth shut, but it ate at me all these years." Gwenda's tears fell, her voice breaking. "You saw it. You saw him kill her. Why didn't you tell my father?" Tom's head bowed, his voice thick. "I wanted to, miss, but the major was broken, and you were so small. I thought it'd do more harm. And Kennedy, he'd going to have crushed me. I'm sorry, truly." Miss Marple's gaze was unyielding, though her tone was kind. "You've told us now, Mr. Riley, and that is enough. Your testimony, with Mrs. Reed's memory and Dr. Kennedy's confession, will seal his fate. The police must hear this." Giles telephoned the station, and within hours 2 constables arrived, taking Tom's statement with grave attention. News came that the cliffside search had yielded Helen's remains. A locket clutched in her skeletal hand, its engraving, "To Helen with love," matching Kennedy's description. The case was complete, the final piece slotted into place by Tom's reluctant truth. As the constables left with Tom, Gwenda stood in the garden, the roses glowing in the fading light. Giles joined her, his arm around her shoulders. "It's done, darling," he said. "Helen's found, Kennedy's caught, and you're free." Miss Marple emerged, her shawl fluttering in the breeze. "A heavy burden lifted, Mrs. Reed," she said. "Your courage and Mr. Riley's have righted a wrong long buried. Hillside is yours now, truly." Gwenda nodded, her tears drying in the wind. The visions had ceased, the staircase no longer a spectre. Helen's memory, once a ghost, was now a quiet presence at peace. The garden, the house, her childhood, they were hers again, reclaimed from the shadow of Kennedy's crime. Chapter 12. Peace at Hillside. The early June sun bathed Dilmouth in a gentle glow, its light filtering through the leaves of Hillside's garden, where roses bloomed with a vigour that seemed to mirror the newfound calm within the house. Gwenda Reed stood on the lawn, her dark curls lifted by a soft sea breeze, her green eyes tracing the horizon where the sea met the sky. The weight of the past weeks, the visions of Helen Halliday's murder, the unearthing of her childhood, memories, the trap that exposed Dr. James Kennedy, and his chilling confession, had lifted, leaving a quiet clarity in its wake. Helen's remains, found in a cliffside grave with her locket, had confirmed Kennedy's guilt, and Tom Riley's testimony, drawn from that night 18 years ago, had sealed his fate. The Dilmouth Gazette reported his trial was imminent. But for Gwenda, the true resolution was here, in the house that had once held her fear and now promised a future. Inside, the drawing room was warm, its polished oak floor reflecting the sunlight that streamed through the bay window. Giles Reed sat at the table, sorting through a stack of letters and blueprints, his sandy hair catching the light as he planned renovations to make Hillside their own. The toy monkey, once a haunting relic of Gwenda's toddler memory, rested on a shelf, no longer a symbol of terror, but a quiet reminder of her resilience. The staircase in the hall, where she'd seen Helen's lifeless body in her visions, stood unshadowed, its banister gleaming under Mrs. Cocker's diligent care. The house felt alive, not with secrets, but with possibility. Miss Jane Marple, preparing to return to St. Mary Mead, sat in her armchair, her grey shawl neatly pinned, a small suitcase packed with her knitting, and a tin of biscuits for the journey. Her bird-like eyes, sharp yet kind, surveyed the room with a satisfaction that belied her unassuming air. She had arrived in Dilmouth as a guest. Her presence acquired force that unravelled a long-buried crime, and now she would leave, her work complete. Yet, as Gwenda joined her, sitting across with a cup of tea, she sensed Miss Marple's thoughts were still turning, sifting the case's final threads. "You've given us a miracle, Miss Marple," Gwenda said, her voice soft but earnest. "I was lost, seeing Helen's death, not knowing why. You saw the truth in my memories, guided us to Kennedy. Without you, he'd still be free, and Hillside would be a prison." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her smile faint but warm. "No miracle, Mrs. Reed, only observation. Your memories were the key, clear as a child's drawing, despite the years. In St. Mary Mead, I've seen truths hidden in plain sight. A glance, a word, a buried toy. You carried Helen's story, and all I did was help you read it." Giles looked up from his papers, his blue eyes bright with gratitude. "You're too modest, Miss Marple. That trap for Kennedy, your idea, was brilliant. And spotting Tom, Riley's role, from Gwenda's memory of pipe smoke. You're sharper than any detective I've met." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her tone remained mild. "Detectives seek facts, Mr. Reed, but human nature is my study. Dr. Kennedy was a man who loved control, and such men betray themselves when pressed. Your courage, both of you, did the rest. And Mr. Riley's honesty, however late, closed the circle." Gwenda sipped her tea, her mind drifting to the night of the trap, when Kennedy's midnight digging had revealed his fear, and his confession had laid bare his crime. The warning voice in her memory, "Stay away," had been Tom's, a gardener protecting a child from a killer's gaze. The locket, found with Helen's remains, bore an engraving that matched Kennedy's description, a final link to his guilt. Yet, as peace settled over Hillside, Gwenda felt a lingering question, not of doubt, but of understanding. "Miss Marple," she said, "how did you know it was Kennedy so early? You suspected him before we even met him." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her hands folding neatly in her lap. "It was his shadow, Mrs. Reed, cast by others' words. Lily Kimball spoke of his possessiveness, Edith Paget of his arguments, Mrs. Cocker of his convenient letter. Each painted a man who could not bear to lose his sister, not to love, but to his own will. When you described his coldness, his too perfect answers, I saw a pattern. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a schoolmaster, admired by all, who locked his wife in their home to keep her safe. His control was his undoing, as Kennedy's was. The letter, never seen, was the first lie, and lies, like weeds, grow in clusters." Gwenda nodded, the logic as clear as the sunlight. His eyes gave him away, too. When we saw him in Westcliff, they were so empty, like he felt nothing for Helen, only anger that she defied him. "Precisely," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but steely. "A man who kills for control feels no remorse, only justification. His digging in the garden was not panic, but calculation to protect his secret. Your memory, Mrs. Reed, was the mirror he could not escape." Giles leaned back, his blueprints forgotten. "What I don't understand is why he confessed. He could have denied it, fought us in court. We had Tom's word, the locket, but he gave up." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her gaze drifting to the fire. A confession, Mr. Reed, is not always surrender. For Dr. Kennedy, it was release. 18 years of guarding a lie is a heavy burden, even for a man of his strength. Your trap and Mrs. Reed's courage showed him the walls closing in. He spoke to unburden himself, perhaps to claim his story before the law did. In St. Mary Mead, a widow once admitted to poisoning her husband, not from guilt, but to tell it her way. Kennedy's pride demanded the same. Gwenda shivered. The memory of Kennedy's voice, raw, defiant, yet hollow, echoing in her mind. "He said he didn't mean to kill her," she murmured. "But he did. He chose to, because she wanted to be free." Miss Marple's eyes softened, a rare warmth breaking through her reserve. "Yes, my dear. And you have freed her, in a way. Helen's truth is known, her resting place found. You've given her peace and yourself." The clock struck 11, and Mrs. Cocker bustled in, carrying a tray of scones and jam, her stout figure a comforting presence. "You'll have a proper lunch before you go, Miss Marple," she said, setting the tray down. "Can't have you travelling on an empty stomach. And you, Mrs. Reed, you're looking brighter. This house feels right again, doesn't it?" Gwenda smiled, the warmth of the room seeping into her. "It does, Mrs. Cocker. It's ours now, not Helen's ghost or Kennedy's shadow. We're staying, Giles and I. We'll make it a home." Mrs. Cocker beamed, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's the spirit. A house like this needs laughter, not secrets. I'll fetch more tea." She bustled out, leaving a trail of warmth behind. Giles reached for a scone, his optimism infectious. "We'll start with the nursery," he said, nodding at the blueprints. "A room for the future, maybe a little one some day. And the garden, we'll clear that rose bed, plant something new. What do you think, darling?" Gwenda's heart lifted. The vision of a child's laughter in Hillside, chasing away the last of her fear. "I'd like that," she said, her voice steady. "Lavender, maybe, and daisies. Something bright to honour Helen." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her smile approving. "A fitting tribute, Mrs. Reed. A garden heals, as does time. You've reclaimed this place, and it will repay you with joy." They ate in companionable silence, the scones warm and the tea fragrant. Gwenda felt the house settle around her, its creaks no longer ominous but familiar, like an old friend's voice. The staircase, once a spectre, was just wood and polish, leading to rooms she and Giles would fill with life. Her visions had ceased, the memory of Helen's death now a quiet sorrow, not a torment. She thought of her father, Major Halliday, broken by Kennedy's lie, and wished she could tell him the truth had been found. As noon approached, Giles fetched Miss Marple's suitcase, and they walked her to the gate, where a taxi waited to take her to the station. The garden bloomed vibrantly, the roses nodding in the breeze, and Gwenda felt a pang of reluctance to see Miss Marple go. "You'll visit, won't you?" she said, her voice thick. "Hillside won't be the same without you." Miss Marple's hand patted hers, her touch light but firm. "I shall, my dear, when my roses in St. Mary Mead spare me. But you've no need of me now. You and Mr. Reed are Hillside's keepers, and you'll do it proud. Write to me, though. I enjoy a good letter." Giles shook her hand, his grin wide. "We owe you everything, Miss Marple. If you ever need a holiday by the sea, our door's open." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, a hint of mischief in their depths. "Thank you, Mr. Reed, but the sea is restless, and I prefer my quiet village. There's always a mystery there, you know, even in the smallest things." She climbed into the taxi, her small figure upright, her wicker basket on her lap. As the car pulled away, Gwenda waved, a lump in her throat. Miss Marple's departure felt like the closing of a book, its pages filled with fear, courage, and truth. Yet the story of Hillside was just beginning, and Gwenda was ready to write it. Back in the drawing room, Giles spread his blueprints, his enthusiasm bubbling. "We'll paint the nursery blue," he said, sketching a window, "and a swing in the garden for when we're old and grey with grandchildren." Gwenda laughed, the sound light and free. "Blue's perfect, and a bench by the lavender for reading. Helen would like that, I think." They worked through the afternoon, planning and dreaming, the house humming with their shared vision. Mrs. Cocker brought lunch, her chatter about Dilmouth's gossip. A cheerful backdrop. As evening fell, Gwenda walked to the garden, the roses glowing in the twilight. She knelt by the rosebed where the toy monkey had lain, and touched the earth, now smooth and untroubled. "Rest well, Helen," she whispered, a quiet farewell to the woman whose death had shaped her life. Inside, Giles lit the fire, and they sat together, the blueprints spread before them. The house was theirs, its secrets laid bare, its shadows banished. Gwenda felt her father's presence too, a gentle echo of love, freed from Kennedy's lie. Hillside was no longer a place of ghosts but a home, its walls ready for laughter, love, and the years ahead. Far away, on the train to St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple gazed out at the passing countryside, her knitting untouched. Her mind, ever active, replayed the case. The child's memory, the brother's control, the gardener's silence. "Human nature," she murmured, her voice lost in the train's rumble, "is the same everywhere, and so, alas, is murder." Judah smiled, her eyes bright with the quiet triumph of justice served. Dilmouth was behind her, but St. Mary Mead waited, its own secrets tucked in its lanes and cottages. Miss Marple was ready for them, her needles poised, her heart as steadfast as ever.